Good Monday morning to you. It is 7 a.m. On today's show, we will be talking about reports that the government will reject any bid by Ireland to return asylum seekers unless France agrees to do the same with boats crossing the Channel. We'll put that to the Work and Pensions Secretary, Mel Stride.
Plus, Scotland's First Minister struggles to put together a coalition that will keep him in office.
And Parliament is set to debate laws about assisted dying, which campaigners say are not right and not ethical.
It is Monday, the 29th of April. Welcome to breakfast. Here are the headlines. The government is set to meet with Irish ministers as the row over migrants travelling from the UK to Ireland escalates. Humza Yousaf's future in the balance. Sky News understands Scotland's First Minister will refuse to enter an electoral pact with the Alba Party to save his premiership. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken touches down on his first stop of a Middle Eastern tour to discuss the governance of a post-war Gaza. More than 200,000 signatures trigger a Westminster debate today on assisted dying. And the UK brings in tough new laws to protect consumers from cybercrimes. Good morning to you and welcome to the Breakfast Show. Well, the government will reportedly reject any bid from Ireland to return asylum seekers unless France agrees to do the same with boats crossing the Channel. Irish ministers claim that the number of asylum seekers crossing the border from Northern Ireland has now increased by 80% since the UK passed the Rwanda deportation plan. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has all the details.
Undeterred by the threat of deportation to Rwanda, these illegal migrants were among hundreds arriving in the UK at the weekend. And the latest Home Office figures reveal more people have arrived by small boats so far this year than ever before. On Saturday, 359 migrants arrived on small boats, taking the total for this year to 7,167 people arriving across the Channel. That's up from 5,745 who had arrived by boat at this time last year. The Home Office says the unacceptable number of people who continue to cross the Channel demonstrates exactly why the government is making plans to get flights off the ground to Rwanda as soon as possible. And Rishi Sunak insisted on Sky News that his approach is working.
The deterrent is, according to your comment, already having an impact because people are worried about coming here, and that demonstrates exactly what I'm saying. If people come to our country illegally but know that they won't be able to stay, they're much less likely to come.
Mr Sunak was responding to the Irish government suggesting that illegal migrants who fear deportation from the UK to Rwanda are crossing the border from Northern Ireland into the Republic. Taoiseach Simon Harris says his country will not in any way, shape or form provide a loophole for anyone else's migration challenges, before proposing new laws tomorrow to return illegal migrants to the UK.
My objective is, as Minister for Justice, is to ensure that we have a structure and a migration system that works. That's why I've introduced fast processing to respond to the increase in numbers. That's why I'll be bringing forward emergency legislation this week to ensure that we have as effective as a returns policy possible.
But the British government has hit back, saying it won't accept any asylum returns from the EU via Ireland until the EU accepts that the UK can send them back to France. Ahead of elections later this week, the UK will also begin the process of removing illegal migrants on flights to Rwanda by detaining up to 2,200, with 200 staff ready to process claims. But even when flights to Rwanda take off, there's no guarantee they'll stop the boats. John Craig, Sky News.
Well, our political correspondent Gurpreet Narwan here with me to discuss all of this. So, Gurpreet, what meetings were we expecting to take place between the UK and the Irish government? Are they still taking place?
So, Helen McEntee, Ireland's Justice Secretary, was due to meet James Cleverly today, but we understand that meeting has been cancelled. James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, citing a diary clash. But the Northern Ireland Secretary is meeting Irish officials today to try and hash some of this out. It all goes back to about last week or so when Michael Martin, Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, started talking about the impact that the Rwanda plan was having on Ireland, saying that it's led to a massive increase in the number of migrants coming over to Ireland because they fear that they'll be sent to Rwanda if they stay in the UK. And as you can imagine, that's kicked up a bit of a stink in Tory circles here in the UK, Tory MPs accusing Ireland of wanting to have its cake and to eat it too, pointing out that there is an open border. So even if migrants are sent back to the UK, they could simply go back to Ireland if they choose to. And it's opened up this sort of long-running sore between the UK and France over migrants coming from Calais to the UK and the trouble that the UK has had in getting France to agree to take them back. And the UK government saying now that any sort of deal would not be possible with Ireland unless France agrees to take migrants back as well. And also pointing out that many of the migrants that come to the UK have come from France in the first place. So why is there no deal to get them back to the EU? In the context of all of this, well, it's a massive rise in the number of boat crossings. I think we've had 7,000 now before April, which is another record. And the government's Rwanda plan is starting to become operational, as you know. So it's not something that Rishi Sunak is going to want to back down on at this point.
I mean, I'm interested in the extent to which maybe this is stating the obvious, but any plan that the UK government enacts that actually ends up working, and as you said with the numbers, maybe it's not right to say the Rwanda plan is working in any way, shape or form yet. But if a plan is successful, it's going to make this more of a problem for EU countries once again, given where, of course, they're setting off from before they reach the UK.
And you'll hear Conservative MPs and ministers, we can expect to hear this from Mel Stride later on today, pointing out that all of this is just pointing to the fact that the Rwanda plan is working. It's obviously acting as a deterrent if it's causing migrants to change their behaviour and go to Ireland because they fear that they're going to be sent to Rwanda. Worth pointing out that the Irish courts have actually deemed that the UK, for all extents and purposes, isn't safe for Ireland to return migrants to because they could be sent on to Rwanda, which isn't a safe country. So Conservative MPs will say, well, you know, all of this just shows that the plan is working, that it's acting as a deterrent. But, I mean, I would point them to the 7,000 record number of migrants coming here before April, which would suggest that it's not acting as much of a deterrent as they would like to at this point. And
that we will at about 7:15, 7:20, when Mel Stride does join us here on The Breakfast Show. We'll also be discussing about some new announcements that his department has towards the long-term unemployed, particularly those unemployed because of mental health reasons. At 8:15, we'll get Labour's response from the Deputy National Campaign Coordinator, Ellie Reeves. So Mel Stride up next at about 20 past. At least 13 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes into Rafah overnight, according to local medical officials. It comes as ceasefire talks continue to end the war in Gaza. Well, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle joins us now from Jerusalem. Ali, there's a couple of different locations for some high-profile talks. When we hear they're happening, we get quite excited, but we've been here before.
Yeah, we have been here before, so we're very cautious about any developments that might be in progress towards a new ceasefire. What I would say is that this time feels a little bit more positive. It feels like certainly the Israeli side is openly willing to compromise further, and possibly Hamas too. So the Israelis have put a new proposal to Hamas via the Egyptians, and they are asking in the first phase at least for the release of fewer hostages, 33 as opposed to their original request of 40. And there is talk about further phases where there would be a partial withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, not a complete withdrawal, and a period of sustained calm in Gaza. And then I think if you got into the first phase of a ceasefire, you would then start to have talks about future phases and more hostages being released. The reason I think that there's some quiet optimism is that this has now been delivered to Hamas. There's a Hamas delegation going to Cairo today. The Israelis have also been invited to send their own delegation to try and speed things up. Overnight, Hamas have been quoted by AFP news agency as saying that they see no major issues with the Israeli proposal, but it will be up to Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, to really give it the rubber stamp if that's what they're inclined to do. And the Israelis are saying to Hamas, don't string us out. We want an answer quite quickly. We do not want you to play tactics to try and delay a Rafah operation. This is your last chance for a ceasefire. And if it doesn't happen this time, we will go into Rafah.
Ali, I'm interested in your take on how important Saudi are in all of this, given, of course, that the location we just saw pictures of Mr. Blinken arriving in was in Saudi, and he and Lord Cameron are there for a World Economic Forum gathering, which now happens every year. It's the Davos of the desert, as people call it. It's back to full attendance. All the Western businesses leaders want to go there after a brief hiatus after the Jamal Khashoggi episode. And I just wonder, in that context, the extent to which, A, you think Saudi is still trying to really woo the West and be seen as a long-term partner for the West, and if so, the extent to which that will influence the behind-the-scenes or in the room points they'll be making towards the ceasefire deal and long-term solutions for Gaza.
Well, I don't think it's just Saudi trying to woo the West. I think there's an element of the West trying to woo Saudi as well. As you say, after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi a few years ago, there was, certainly under the Biden, the early years of the Biden presidency, an attempt to try and sideline Saudi Arabia because of their role in that murder. But I think pragmatism has now sort of ploughed through, and there's a realization, I mean, everybody always knew it, that Saudi Arabia was or is an absolutely crucial player here in the Middle East. It is one of the major powers in the Middle East, so it can't be ignored for very long, but also it sits centre to a lot of the future of the Middle East. And whilst I don't think the Saudis are playing a crucial role right now in what's going on in Gaza, they're not front and centre of any ceasefire hostage talks, for example. The expectation is that they would play a lead role in the day after scenario. So the rebuilding of Gaza, for example, the construction of any political governance in Gaza and possibly the West Bank. And integral to that is this prospect of a normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That is the carrot that I think the Americans are trying to create for Benjamin Netanyahu. Normalization with Saudi Arabia. It would be a big, big deal, but what is Saudi Arabia going to demand in return from Israel? Will they demand a full-out two-state solution, or will it be something lesser?
And just quickly, Ali, I mean, overnight and late yesterday, missile attacks on Rafah, is that as bad in negotiators' minds as a ground offensive in Rafah?
I think it is part of this future ground offensive. It is, I think there's probably two purposes in it. Firstly, you would expect to see increased air campaign ahead of any ground invasion as they soften up targets or they take out key locations that they want to. We saw that in Khan Yunis, we saw that in Gaza City many months ago. So it is wrapped into the potential for a ground offensive. And secondly, when you look at it in the context of the ceasefire negotiations, it is there to try and remind Hamas, the Rafah operation, the Rafah invasion is a very real prospect. The Israelis are not kidding. They want to do it, they're going to do it, and so I think it is also designed to put pressure on Hamas.
Alistair Bunkle, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Well, a reminder, we'll be talking to Mel Stride in about 5 or so minutes' time. But firstly, it's got all of the day's other news, including a lot going on north of the border.
Oh, indeed. Yeah, let's bring viewers up to date very quickly then. The former First Minister and leader of Scotland's Alba Party, Alex Salmond, says he's prepared to make reasonable proposals to help the current leader stay in the top job. Humza Yousaf's under pressure to agree a renewed push for Scottish independence in return for the party's support. Ahead of 2 votes of no confidence this week, Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis reports.
And if you stand stepping back into the spotlight.
Good morning, Trevor, from springtime in Aberdeenshire.
Will the SNP leader of yesteryear be the man to save its current boss, Humza Yousaf, who battles to cling on?
If this is a move back to the issues of jobs, education and health and housing, then that's to be welcomed, and we'd be prepared to assist in that as long as independence is restored as a key priority of the Scottish Government.
A set of demands from Mr Salmon's Alba party. Their sole MSP, Ash Regan, will meet the embattled SNP leader for emergency talks. She could cast the deciding vote in the looming no-confidence motion. There had been some suggestion about Salmon demanding the SNP step aside in some Scottish seats in an electoral pact. A source close to Humza Yousaf rejected that almost immediately, and Salmon has distanced himself from it already. But one SNP MP has said any alliance would go down like a cup of cold sick among their supporters. Will this pair pivot in their position? The Greens sacked from government just days ago. The same party who the First Minister also wants to talk to as he fights for his future.
The Scottish Green Group have said we will vote in support of a vote of confidence, vote of no confidence against Humza Yousaf. And I cannot imagine anything at this point that could change that position. And I do have, trust and respect for many of my SNP colleagues, but Humza Yousaf himself has broken that. He needs to face the consequences.
Humza Yousaf will chair those critical talks as early as Monday as his career hangs in the balance, swallowing his pride in a crisis that's entering a critical phase. Conor Gillis, Sky News.
Well, the government will reveal its plans to overhaul the disability benefit system a bit later today. Speaking to the Times newspaper, Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride suggested that people with mild mental health conditions will no longer receive financial support. Of course, we'll hear more from him in the next few minutes. Hundreds of Border Force staff at Heathrow Airport are to start their four-day strike today. They're protesting changes to working conditions. The Public and Commercial Services Union says more than 300 members of staff will stop working in Terminals 2, 3, 4 and 5. The union says around 250 border staff will lose their jobs under new roster plans. The Home Office says plans are in place to minimise disruption. A lack of access to clinical trials for teenagers and young adults with cancer is setting back treatment and their chances of survival. The Teenage Cancer Trust says there aren't enough trials for 13 to 24-year-olds.
Young people often get some of the rarest and least common forms of cancer, and there are fewer trials available for those. So things like brain cancers and soft tissue sarcomas. And because there are relatively small numbers of young people with cancer, I think it's really important we remember that cancer kills more young people in the UK than any other disease. So making sure that young people have got access to the newest and best treatments.
Also, 9 men will go on trial in Stuttgart today, charged in connection with an alleged far-right plot to topple the German government. Charges include high treason, attempted murder, plotting a violent coup and imposing martial law. The hearing in a maximum security courtroom marks the start of 3 trials for 27 people and one of the largest legal proceedings in German history.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Now, Thursday's local elections could be the last big test of the government's popularity before the next general election. Rishi Sunak has also got a by-election to worry about, with good reason, according to the polls. But despite the collapse of Tory support in the rest of the country, it looks like the party's mayor will hang on in Tees Valley. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has this report.
May 2021, a shock by-election win in Hartlepool. Boris Johnson triumphing where his party hadn't in decades.
Are you here in Hartlepool for good, or is this a one-off win?
It's been a long 3 years for the Conservative Party. It was on this exact spot that was the high tide of Boris mania. He conquered the Red Wall. But the picture today is very different.
Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchen romped to re-election in 2021 with over 70% of the vote.
Thank you very much.
This chippy was a campaign stop in 2021. Diners now have less appetite for the party in power.
What's your view of the Conservatives?
Very disappointed. The first time that I'd voted Conservative and I felt they let me down.
With his party and its leader well behind in the polls, the mayor's campaign has one clear message. Ben. You have to look very, very closely at his adverts to find the word Conservatives or any other link to Rishi Sunak's party. Local investment is at the heart of the mayor's personal brand. Hartlepool's town shopping centre is promised a major renewal, but locals' patience is wearing thin.
Have you seen levelling up since the Tories come in?
Levelling up? Well, that's a joke as well, isn't it? You level up in London, but you don't level up in the northeast of England.
For Labour, victory here would be a big step in rebuilding the Red Wall.
So whilst there's an appearance of big projects going up and a lot of announcements, people on the doorstep are saying to me that they're not actually seeing the difference.
Ben Houchen may buck the trend in this corner of the Red Wall, which would be a ray of light for Rishi Sunak in an otherwise dismal set of results, because it could demonstrate the party losing its grip on parts of the north that lent their vote to Boris Johnson.
At the other end of the Red Wall, there's a vacancy in Blackpool. This, a Labour seat for 2 decades, until Boris Johnson came along. But now the scandal-hit Conservative MP has resigned.
Place your bets!
Would you be voting Tory at the next election?
No, definitely not. I'll vote anybody to get the Tories out.
If Boris Johnson was still in, do you think the Tories would have a chance around here?
Yeah.
Probably. Probably, sadly.
With Boris Johnson gone and little levelling up money falling their way, could the absence of larger-than-life figures be a handicap in the 2-horse race for number 10?
Number 2 is your winner!
We'll talk to Sam in just a moment, but first, some breaking news. Sky News understands that Humza Yousaf, the First Minister, of course, in Scotland, is considering resigning. Let's bring in Sam Coates, who's here with me. Sam, give us the context of this. Is this a decision he's made on his own?
I think very much he'll probably be feeling he's forced into contemplating this outcome. I mean, of course, he hasn't resigned, but he has clearly put it on the table that this is an outcome. Look, people in Holyrood yesterday were saying he was a dead man walking, because even though there are some SNP voices who are defending him, there is a lot of anger about how he's handled the last week or so in Scottish politics, ripping up that coalition with the Greens after ripping up the climate change agreement as part of a wider coalition deal that he'd done with them, known as the Butte House deal. And I think that gradually his options have narrowed. It looks as if we're about to go into an even greater period of turmoil in Scottish politics. If he does go, can somebody else who succeeds him command a majority of the Scottish Parliament? If not, do we tumble into into a Scottish parliamentary election? And what would be the outcome of that? Possibly a messy minority government. I think there's quite a long way to go on this.
And on the question that you just mentioned, I mean, is there a unity candidate available?
I mean, given the way that the parties have come out in recent days, it's hard to be sure that there is. One possibly pivotal figure had been Ash Regan, who is part of Alex Salmond's Alba party, but because she herself is a defector from the SNP and Alex Salmond has played the role with the SNP in the past that he has, that's an incredibly toxic choice, which might not mean you could carry the rest of the SNP. The Greens might be an alternative, but they're the people who less than a week ago were kicked out of the Scottish government. Options are quite narrow.
And just to expand for us a bit more, if this were to lead to elections, it's Scottish parliamentary elections, obviously not parliamentary elections in Westminster. What's the balance of power as things stand in the Scottish Parliament, and what increase would the SNP need? They're on the margin of a majority as things stand.
That's right. At the moment, there is a nationalist majority in the Scottish Parliament, but the SNP had to team up with the Greens to have a majority in order to get things done, in order to not have endless confidence votes and get their budgets through. And that climate change agreement had been the sort of glue that had kept that coalition together. Now, there hasn't been consistent Scottish polling for a few months, so we couldn't be clear exactly what would happen if there is a Scottish parliamentary election. But the likelihood is that the SNP might come out on top with the largest number of seats, but then there would be a unionist majority. All those unionist parties would club together probably to put in Anas Sarwar, the Labour leader, but he would have a messy minority government trying to get policies through vote by vote. It's not clear this outcome is particularly good for anyone.
Sam, great stuff. Thanks so much. Sam will be back throughout the morning to discuss the contents of his package, of course, that we were watching there in the local elections coming on Thursday. But we can bring in now our Scotland correspondent, Conor Gillis. Conor, what have you learnt in the last few moments?
Well, there's been a lot of debate and discussion over the course of the weekend about the future of Scotland's First Minister. Speaking exclusively to Sky News on Saturday, the embattled SNP leader Humza Yousaf was clear that he couldn't rule out a Holyrood election. Why is that the case? Well, he is facing this looming vote of no confidence in his premiership potentially later on this week. He had a dramatic falling out, many people will remember, with the Scottish Greens, who he was essentially in coalition with for many years, up until Thursday when he sacked them on the spot. They have had a furious reaction and they have said that they will now not support him and they will actively vote against him in that no confidence motion. Couple together the Liberal Democrats, Labour and the Conservatives, and that puts Humza Yousaf in a really tricky position, and he knows that. Over the weekend, the Alba party, which has one MSP, Ash Regan, and that's a party headed up by Alex Salmond, an old foe of the SNP, bitter rivals with the SNP. And he was here on Sky News telling us that he was open to discussions, but he and his party, Ash Regan, would have a list of demands that would have to be met as the price for voting for Humza Yousaf in this key vote. Now, I have been having conversations with senior figures within the SNP and the Scottish Government in the course of the last 12 hours, and just in the last few minutes, a senior source has told me that a deal, any sort of deal with Alba, Alex Salmond's party, is incredibly unlikely. And it's not really about the deal here. It's about Alex Salmond and inviting him essentially back into the fold all those years on from when he essentially went into the doldrums of Scottish political life. So they are essentially saying whatever the deal, this is doing a deal with the devil. And how palatable will that be to SNP members getting back into bed with Alex Salmond, the SNP and the Alba party? And although publicly the First Minister is saying, come back round the table, let's have these discussions, let's see what deal can be struck. Privately, I think there are some serious questions now about how the next couple of days look. And Sky News understands one option on the table is that Scotland's First Minister pulls the rug, he resigns, and that could happen as early as today. So this is a big moment. Sky News understands that the First Minister is actively and seriously considering his position as the head of Scotland's government this morning. We'll see how the coming hours pan out.
Conor, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. And we are able to discuss all of this and a lot more with the government now. Mel Stride joins me, the Work and Pensions Secretary. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Will.
Good to see you. So let's just pick up on issues north of the border. Should Humza Yousaf resign? Has his authority already disappeared?
Well, I think that's a matter for him. It's a matter for the SNP, but it does seem an extraordinary mess that he's managed to get him and the SNP have got themselves into, that they are now potentially going to be beholden to Alba in the situation that they find themselves. Look, the most important thing for the Scottish people is actually what happens down on the ground with the services that they care about. And if you look at the SNP's record, their obsession with independence, I'm afraid, has led to very poor outcomes when it's come to health, when it's come to education and a number of other areas, despite the fact that because they're part of the UK, the amount of spending per head in Scotland on public services is about 30% higher than it is in England. So overall, very unsatisfactory. But it's for them to decide where they go from here.
I guess what this is also potentially a sign of is that as soon as there's talk of even facing a vote of confidence, the game might be up. It's, I guess, something you must hope that there's never enough letters that come in for the current leader of the Conservative Party and that the elections this week, the local elections, go well enough to prevent that.
Well, look, what I and my colleagues in Parliament are focused on is promoting the successes that this government is having, and I don't think we hear enough about this, and there's cacophony of other things going on, that we've got inflation down from 11.1% to 3.2%. We've had real wages growing for each of the last 9 months. We've been cutting taxes, going down by £900 for an average earner as a result of cutting the double taxation that national insurance represents. We've got crime down 20%, including fraud, over the last year. And in my area of welfare, we're making real reforms that are changing people's lives, helping people back into work. Now, those are things that we need to be talking about and we need to be uniting around.
Taxes, of course, cut in percentage terms, not in real terms, in terms of pound for pound. Let's talk about your area. Let's talk about your area and what you're announcing today and some of the reforms, particularly towards benefit payments that will go for mental health issues. Is it fair, reading through the press release and your interviews in the print papers that you've given, that you're saying that mental health should be addressed but with treatment, not with allowing you to stay out of work for a long term?
So I want us to have a grown-up, sensible conversation about a benefit called PIP that has not been reviewed in over a decade. And I want to ask the question, is it fit for purpose, given the world that we're in today, in which mental health issues, sadly, present more of an issue than they did a decade ago. So I think we've really got to be asking questions about how we target that benefit. Is it right, for example, that those that have long-term progressive conditions that are sadly not going to get any better are still asked to go through reassessments and all the bureaucracy and jumping through hoops that involves? But to the point that you mentioned, absolutely, we should be thinking about whether straight cash transfer benefits are the answer for everybody, or whether some, at least, might benefit from treatment that will help their condition. And in many cases where if they're out of work, help get them into work. Because what we know about work is, all the evidence shows this, Wilf, is that it's good for our mental health. So we are now going to have a very grown-up conversation over the next 12 weeks and going to come forward with proposals after that.
To what extent is the huge rise in mental health issues just that we've all woken up to it being a genuine and legitimate issue?
I think that there is no doubt that it's much better today, in the sense that whereas in the past people suffered in silence, they felt awkward about discussing mental health, we've thankfully gone well beyond that, and a lot of people are getting treatment who would previously have suffered quietly. But there are a number of things that have pressed on mental health issues. Now, one of them is social media, because if you look at the age cohort, which have particularly been affected by mental health conditions, it's 16 to 24-year-olds, younger people, where social media undoubtedly is having an effect. COVID, lockdown, undoubtedly had an effect. An ageing society where older people have a greater propensity to illness and conditions is also having effects. So there are many things feeding into it. The big question, though, is how do we respond to that? And that's why I'm having this consultation, is that the terrain has changed and we have to think very carefully about how we move forward with these benefits, and also look at what other countries are doing. Many other countries with these benefits are taking very different approaches to ourselves, and I think in some cases we're going to have something to learn from them.
Let's talk about the Rwanda deal and the exchanges with Ireland over the weekend. I'm not trying to be provocative with this question, but any plan that works to stop small boats, will it, by design, given where they've left from, be making it the EU's problem once again?
Well, the design, as you put it, is to ensure that there is a deterrent effect. Now, we passed the Rwanda bill, and that means that those that are coming here illegally can expect to be removed to Rwanda. And what we're already seeing, and it's a matter of days since that bill has been passed, is the deterrent effect kicking in. So that's why you're seeing people moving from the UK across into the Republic of Ireland, is that deterrent effect
by design?
Is beginning. Well, no, we certainly didn't sit down and think about where we would expect people to start moving to, but we did, by design, very clearly put something in place that acts as a serious deterrent to those criminal gangs. Remember, that's what we're dealing with, who are sacrificing people's lives in dangerous crossings across the cold, dark waters of the Channel. And we've had terrible, terrible examples of that in recent times. A young girl of just 7 being crushed on a boat and losing her life, etc. That's what we've got to stop. And that's part of the humanitarian approach that lies at the heart of what we're doing, is we've got to stop this evil trade.
I guess the final point on this is just whether or not the UK government is happy to make this a major problem for EU partners and friends.
No, we're certainly not out to make any problems for EU partners at all. In fact, our immediate response to this is engagement. So the Home Secretary will be having a meeting very shortly with his counterpart to discuss exactly these issues.
There was reports that meeting today was cancelled, but it is taking place?
Sorry, it's early in the morning and I'm not hearing a minute-by-minute account as to whether meetings are on or off. But I do know that we are absolutely committed as a government to, of course, with Ireland, with whom we have excellent diplomatic relations, etc., that we will be having discussions with them at some point on exactly these matters. But we can't get away from the fact that the whole purpose of this is deterrence, is to stop people, to break this model of these gangs exploiting people and bringing illegal migrants to our shores. And these are early signs that this is working. The Prime Minister has said in 10 to 12 weeks we will see people on aeroplanes going to Rwanda, and we will see that deterrent signal strengthening over the coming weeks.
Of course, very early signs, and looking just at Ireland's numbers and things over the last week. Year to date for the UK, of course, numbers are up on last year. Just quickly and finally on this, is it true that the first asylum seekers that might be on the first flights are going to begin to be detained this week?
Look, we are not going to be delaying. We are pressing ahead full square. We have a number, 150 judges in place ready to consider these issues. We have more detention space available. We have flights that are booked. We have an airfield that is ready to go. We are not hanging around, but we are going to do it properly. What the Prime Minister has said, that is within 10 to 12 weeks, we can expect to see people on flights.
Tribe, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Shows. MPs are set to debate changing the law on assisted dying. We'll be hosting our own discussion on that issue. That's next. And smart devices now required to get smarter, protecting us from cyber criminals. That story too. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. MPs will debate whether or not to legalise assisted dying today. It comes after more than 200,000 members of the public signed an online petition. But not everyone, of course, is happy about it. To hear both sides of the debate, I'm joined now by Dr Jacqueline Davis from Dignity in Dying and Dr Mark Pickering from Care Not Killing. Thank you both for joining us. Firstly, I'll come to you, Jackie, if I may. Just remind us what's being debated today and what comes with that debate.
We're debating the legislation for assisted dying in this country, which would be based on the Oregon law and would be available for terminally ill people with less than 6 months to live and of sound mind. And there's no vote today, obviously, but that's what's being debated.
And do you, as someone that clearly believes in assisted dying, see this as good progress, sufficient progress to getting where you want to be or not?
Well, it's very important the debate's happening in Parliament, even though there's no formal vote on it. But what we'd really like, of course, is legislation in this country, because every day that we don't have legislation, people are suffering, they're taking their own lives, they're going to Dignitas. And it really is time to move this along and let people in this country have the choice that 250 million people have got around the world at the moment.
Mark, you obviously disagree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the proposals that are going even in the British Isles are way beyond what even Jackie would want. So in Scotland, we've now got a bill that would a 16-year-old with anorexia could access assisted dying through there. In Jersey, a disabled person could be euthanized by their doctor. And this is not what Dignity in Dying wants, but their campaigning has brought about these bills which would take us much further than they ever want to. And it's fine to say, oh, don't worry, we just want Oregon. You can ask for Oregon and you can get Canada and things, where things are, it's like a runaway train in Canada. And everywhere the law changes, the numbers go up, the criteria become more elastic, the safeguards get eaten away. There's no reason to think that wouldn't happen here in the UK.
One thing, Jackie, would be how people act once a law's in place. The first thing would be getting a law right.
Mm-hmm.
What's your response to what Mark just said?
I think it's really important to get the law right, because the law that you pass is the law that you get. Now, I went to Oregon last year. They've had the law in place for 25 years. There's been no slippery slope. It accounts for less than 1% of deaths there. And they've never expanded the criteria for who can have an assisted death, terminally ill, of sound mind. And that's how it is. And it works very well there. And I think it's really important to understand that once the law is passed, all these concerns go away, because people see that it works, it becomes part of end-of-life care, it brings compassion and choice to people, but very few people actually have to use it, because palliative care is very good.
Mark, is your only issue with it is that the law might not be executed in the right way?
I think executed
it's the wrong word.
Right
Yeah,
word
I shouldn't have used that word. But you understand my point.
I think whenever Jackie's got great intentions, and many of her colleagues do, but you cannot stop the law changing. Even in Oregon, the residency requirement for Oregonians has been dropped. The terminal illness definitions are being more elasticated, and things do change. And you can't just look at one jurisdiction and say, oh, we'll just be like that. There's no reason why it couldn't be like in Canada. And palliative care funding does not keep pace with other countries that don't change the law. And promises of extra palliative care funding, like in New South Wales, big promises were trumpeted along with the law change, but very soon those promises were cut. So it never quite delivers. I think for compassion and dignity, there are many people who want to have this, like Paul Lamb, who was a chronically ill disabled person in pain for many years, and Dignity in Dying did not support his campaign for law change, but he wanted compassion, he wanted choice, and he wanted dignity. And you can't make arbitrary distinctions between people simply based on terminal illness.
Jackie, this debate always resonates, both sides of it, with everyone can see the sort of strength of the arguments on both sides. Talk us through the realities of the numbers. If you got the sort of law that you would like to see, obviously we'd all hope no one would ever have to use it, but in reality, are we talking about 1% of the population that might end up using it? More or less?
Mark talks a lot about Canada. We will not have the Canada situation here, because it's a completely different legal setup. And every law that's been presented in Parliament has been based on the Oregon law. So it's really useful to look at what goes on in Oregon. Less than 1% of deaths there. And the important thing is that everybody knows...
Less than 1% to what extent?
You want
Is
an
it nearly
actual...
1%? I mean,
I think it's 0.6% or something
Okay.
like that. I mean, it's a vanishingly small number of deaths because most people don't need an assisted death, but the people who do, we know that 17 people a day die in this country with unrelieved suffering. We know that hundreds of people kill themselves every year with terminal illness because they're afraid of what's going to happen. And we know that if you've got £15,000 and you go early, you can go to Dignitas, but we shouldn't be making people go to Dignitas. They should be allowed to die in their own beds with their family around them peacefully at a time of their choosing if they know they're going to die soon anyway.
We're nearly out of time, but my final question for you both, forgive me, it's rather a functional one, but is what you each see from your respective organisations as the challenge ahead. Mark, do you think that the country is getting close to this and you've got a big challenge to stop it or not?
I think Jackie and people on her side have been campaigning for this since 1936. It's not a new campaign. Things do change, and of course the law may change, but what we really need to change is the access to palliative care. Jackie has said that thousands of people are dying in pain, in suffering. That's true, and it's largely because they can't get access to the excellent palliative care that could be there. That's what's cruel, that's what's broken, and that's what we should fix.
Jackie, last word. Do you think you're getting close? Is this debate today going to change anything?
I think that over 80% of people in this country want an assisted dying legislation. I think MPs are starting to understand that and to be less afraid of the vocal minority who don't want this. And people are understanding that offering compassionate choice at the end of care, at the end of life, is a safe thing to do with a lot of safeguards. And I hope this will drive it forward and that we'll get it very quickly.
Dr. Jackie Davis, Dr. Mark Pickering, thank you both very much for joining us. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, Sky News understands Humza Yousaf is considering resigning as he faces 2 no-confidence votes this week. We'll be speaking to the Albert Party's Westminster leader, MP Neil Hanby. That's next.
I wasn't expecting to be having a course in photography during basic training, but actually it's an incredibly important tool to use on the space station. Some of the particularly amazing outreach that we do, as well as kind of comparing how the Earth looks between one mission to the next, which is obviously really important for how our Earth is changing. But a lot of the important communication we do is done by taking pictures of the Earth. It's a fantastic vantage point from the ISS. So indeed, things like photography training were certainly a big surprise, but it's just been a really broad training in everything from engineering and systems to the practical trainings as well. Of course, we all watch the launches with great excitement, and then there's the mission on board, which is the focus, getting that science done. But landing is a really important part of it, and doing that safely is challenging. And of course, if you come down, if you end up landing in an area that you weren't anticipating landing in, it could be hours or even days before rescue teams can come to collect you. So the winter survival training was to teach us how to do that if we end up in an environment that is harsh, that is cold.
Rosemary, you beat 22,500 other applicants to become an astronaut and go on this course. What do you think made you stand out?
I feel very, very fortunate to have been selected. And in terms of technical backgrounds, the selection was really to be a scientific background or engineering or medicine or a pilot, for example, were the big ones. But a lot of the selection process really focused on the psychological aspects, which I think is more difficult to evaluate in some senses. And they've really done a fantastic job of that, because as a team now, as a crew this year, we've been bonding really, really well. And it's a real pleasure to work with my teammates. A lot of the emphasis we've had from the experienced astronauts in terms of their advice, which isn't perhaps what you first think about when you start training as an astronaut, is really how patient you have to be. Of course, it's so exciting to be going through the training now, and we're really lucky that we know we'll be going to the International Space Station for 6 months in the next few years. But of course, there may well be a few years to wait, and you have to make sure that you keep your skills current, you keep your training until that moment comes when you're assigned a mission. So that's something that I think has been really valuable to hear firsthand from the experienced colleagues.
Welcome back. Well, Sky News understands Humza Yousaf is considering resigning as Scotland's First Minister as early as today, as he faces 2 votes of no confidence this week. Joining me now is the Labour Party's Westminster leader, Neil Hanvey. Very good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Should he resign?
I think that's a matter for the First Minister to decide, but it seems that his hand is being forced from within the SNP. We've got a very clear offer on the table from Ash Regan that would reprioritise Scottish independence, refocus and the efforts of the Scottish Government onto delivering for the people of Scotland in terms of the economy, health and education and other matters, but importantly to move away from the very difficult issue of identity politics, which has been the source of many of the SNP and the Green Party's woes in government recently. But it seems that the internal manoeuvrings within the SNP have made it impossible for the First Minister to continue. I don't think he would be even considering resigning if he had the support of his parliamentary group. And I think reading between the lines, that's not something that he can depend on now. And that's possibly why he's been forced to seriously consider resigning.
Is it impossible for him to continue?
Well, I don't think it's impossible for him to continue if he was able to, reach across to the Alpa Party and to come together on the positions that we've put out in Ash Regan's letter last Friday. But I think where the difficulty lies is that there are many people in the SNP who seem to think that the Scottish Green Party and particularly Patrick Harvey should have more sway in the decisions of the Scottish Government than the First Minister of Scotland. And they seem to be rowing in behind the Green Party and identity politics over a First Minister who would have the opportunity to reprioritise Scottish independence. It's quite an extraordinary development.
In terms of that, I guess you're hinting at a wish for unity amongst those parties in Scotland that want to see independence. Is that achievable realistically in the near future? And if so, would you have had Ash Regan step away from the SNP and lead your party, not to mention Alex Salmond? Is there quite a lot of self-interest involved across both parties?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but there's no self-interest in my involvement with politics. I got involved in politics for that particular purpose, to achieve Scottish independence. It's my absolute focus and as I say, the reason that I'm involved. The difficulty that we have is that there are, I think, certain actors who have put their own personal ambitions above the national cause and who have subsequently adopted the identity politics, which are being discredited right, left and centre now. But they're putting their personal interests and identity politics before the cause of independence. So it's very difficult to see without some significant change in the thinking of the independence movement that we will make progress, because it doesn't seem that independence is even on the SNP's radar any longer.
I guess the sort of final question on this is if things unfold in the coming days, the coming 28 days perhaps is the operative number, does the Alba Party welcome fresh elections?
We said over the weekend we had an emergency meeting of our NEC. We've taken the position that we are on an election footing, so we're making preparations for that, should that eventuality happen. But it's very difficult to see who, if anyone, within the SNP's Holyrood parliamentary group would be able to unite the party, unite the movement and advance the cause of Scottish independence. So yes, of course, we are absolutely determined to fight the next Holyrood elections, whether they're within the next month or as scheduled in 2026, or indeed both.
Finally, has Humza Yousaf been a good leader for Scotland?
I think Humza was dealt a very difficult hand. He inherited a huge number of problems that were waiting to be exposed from his predecessor. Unfortunately, he chose to set himself up as the continuity candidate. He didn't stamp his own authority on his First Ministership, and he has been buffeted by events that unfortunately were largely beyond his control. But, you know, I think the way that he handled events last Thursday show a lack of political guile in the way that he's handled things, and he certainly hasn't done anything to enhance his relationship with the other parties in Westminster, and this is the consequence of that.
Neil Hamby, thanks for joining us. Much appreciated. This is going to be a top story throughout the day here on Sky News. Waiting for further details coming from Butte House. And I know the team at Sky, the wonderful team at Sky News today will be all over that. And Gareth able to join us with a good preview of what's to come. And Gareth, this story will be top of the agenda, no doubt.
All eyes to Scotland this morning. Hey, and throughout the course of the day too, Neil Hamby there being very diplomatic, wasn't he? Didn't answer your question directly as to whether or not Humza Yousaf had been a good leader, but there's lots of pressure. We've got those upcoming votes Wednesday and Thursday, those votes of no confidence into him and also his government. If we look to last week, Wilf, he pushed the Greens out before they jumped, so potentially we'll see the same again. This time, he'll jump before he'll push. So, yeah, well, lots of attention on Scotland this morning and throughout the course of the day. We'll have our correspondent Conor Gillies is heading to Edinburgh for us. Butte House, obviously, the centre of that agreement between the Greens and the SNPs, which then all broke down and has led to where Humza Yousaf finds himself at the moment. Obviously, of course, important as well for UK politics and down in Westminster. It's the third largest party. What will happen if they drop lower than that?
Gareth, great stuff. Good to see you there. Looking good there in the Sky newsroom, and we'll see you later. Of course, in the glass box for Sky News today at 10 a.m. We're going to take a very quick break here on Breakfast. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. A very good morning to you. It is 8 o'clock. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Coming up on today's show, Sky News understands Scotland's embattled First Minister is considering resigning.
Plus, reports the government will reject any bids by Ireland to return asylum seekers unless France agrees to do the same with boats crossing the Channel.
And Parliament is set to debate laws about assisted dying, which campaigners say are not right and not ethical.
It is Monday, the 29th of April. Here are the headlines. Humza Yousaf's future in the balance. The First Minister could walk today ahead of 2 no-confidence votes this week. The government said to meet with Irish ministers as the row over migrants travelling from the UK to Ireland escalates. The minister on this show pointing out its Rwanda deal is working.
What we're already seeing, and it's a matter of days since that bill has been passed, is the deterrent effect kicking in. So that's why you're seeing people moving from the UK across into the Republic of Ireland.
Minister trying to point that out. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken touching down on his first stop of a Middle East tour to discuss the governance of a post-war Gaza. More than 200,000 signatures trigger a Westminster debate today on assisted dying. And the UK brings into law tough new rules to protect consumers from cybercrimes. Well, we begin with breaking news this hour, and Sky News understands that the First Minister of Scotland and SNP leader Humza Yousaf is considering resigning ahead of 2 confidence votes he faces this week. That's after the collapse of his power-sharing agreement with the Scottish Greens. He needs the support of Alex Salmond's Alba party, which has reportedly distanced itself from a deal. We got reaction from the Work and Pensions Secretary, Mel Stride.
I think that's a matter for him, it's a matter for the SNP, but it does seem an extraordinary mess that he's managed to get him and the SNP have got themselves into, that they are now potentially going to be beholden to Alba in the situation that they find themselves. Look, the most important thing for the Scottish people is actually what happens down on the ground with the services that they care about. And if you look at the SNP's record, their obsession with independence, I'm afraid, has led to very poor outcomes when it's come to health, when it's come to education and a number of other areas, despite the fact that because they're part of the UK, the amount of spending per head in Scotland on public services is about 30% higher than it is in England. So overall, very unsatisfactory.
Well, our political correspondent Gurpreet Narwan joins me now. Mel Stride trying to put the Conservative sort of election pitch to Scottish people out there. But just remind us of what Humza Yousaf faces in terms of these no-confidence votes and why, therefore, he might well be considering jumping before he's pushed, as it were.
Well, this is all kind of comes back to a mess last week over a deal, power-sharing deal with the Greens. Humza Yousaf has decided to pull out of that, and now he's facing no-confidence votes from Labour, Scottish Conservatives, which threatens to bring him down, and he may resign ahead of that. I think what we got from Mel Stride there was... I mean, let's not forget, it's not exactly the case that the Conservatives, the Scottish Tories, are having an easy time in Scotland either, although we did see some fiery exchanges by Douglas Ross in Holyrood, submitting that no-confidence motion. But Mel Stride there trying to create some distance between what the Conservatives can offer and what the SNP have done in Scotland, saying that things that matter on the ground to people, it's things like education, health, talking about some of the policies that the Conservatives are implementing. He really wanted to push his welfare reforms there, and kind of speaking to this idea that there are disaffected SNP voters who don't really align with the party's stance on social issues, more socially conservative voters, and we know that the SNPs have made a very big deal about gender issues, the new hate crime law that's been passed. So really trying to create some space between what the Tories have to offer and what the SNP have to offer in Scotland.
Now, we also, with Mel Stride, were discussing the latest headlines in and around the Rwanda plan and migration, which included the spat with Ireland.
The design, as you put it, is to ensure that there is a deterrent effect. Now, we passed the Rwanda bill, and that means that those that are coming here illegally can expect to be removed to Rwanda. And what we're already seeing, and it's a matter of days since that bill has been passed, is the deterrent effect kicking in. So that's why you're seeing people moving from the UK across into the Republic of Ireland, is that deterrent
Is that by
effect
design?
is beginning. Well, no, we certainly didn't sit down and think about where we would expect people to start moving to, but we did, by design, very clearly put something in place that acts as a serious deterrent.
Is it acting successfully as a deterrent so far?
Well, that's definitely the line that the government is trying to push. We've got the local elections on Thursday, and they're trying to kind of turn this spat between the UK and Ireland, if you want to call it that, into a positive news story, saying actually all it's showing is how successful a deterrent this policy is. Mel Stride said it's early days, but it's an early sign that it is working, because migrants are going to Ireland because they fear that they will be deported if they stay here. He said that this wasn't about making life difficult for the Europeans. It's just kind of a natural byproduct of a successful policy. However, as we know, boat crossings last year did fall, but they're on the up again. And we've had a record number in the year to April, about 7,000 boat crossings. He's saying it's early signs that it's working, but there's questions about when the deterrent kicked in. Because if we've got record numbers of boat crossings, that wouldn't suggest that it's very much effective as a deterrent policy. And Labour would argue, we're going to hear from Ellie Reeves later, that there's a huge opportunity cost to this policy. So even if there are early signs that it might be working, it's cost a hell of a lot of money to get to this point, and that comes with an opportunity cost. And other policies may have been more effective, but we'll wait to see what she has to say about it all.
We will. We'll be talking to Labour's Ellie Reeves in just a few minutes' time, in about 10 minutes. Gurpreet, for now. Thanks so much. Now, at least 13 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes into Rafah overnight, according to local medical officials. It comes as ceasefire talks continue to attempt to end the war in Gaza. Well, our Middle East correspondent Alison Bunkle joins us now from Jerusalem. Ali, what exactly took place overnight, and how does it compare to the idea of a full ground offensive on Rafah? How will that be viewed by all of the key parties?
Yes, more airstrikes on Rafah overnight, and what we've seen over the last week or so is an increase in the number of airstrikes on the city. And I think that is probably consistent with the idea that if there is going to be a ground invasion of Rafah, you would expect to see an uptick in air activity first. And so that looks to be what the Israelis are doing, targeting key sites they have identified, or they believe they have identified in Rafah. And of course, at the same time, it will continue to put military pressure on Hamas. If there was any doubt in Hamas's minds whether or not Israel was serious about a ground invasion, then this is Israel's message to them that they are, and that in turn, at least from an Israeli perspective, is hoped that it would help move along a possible new ceasefire deal.
In terms of the potential for a new ceasefire deal, where are talks happening today and this week? Are they all purely focused on the Israel-Gaza situation, or are there sort of broader things at play, particularly given, I guess, the background for the conference in Saudi?
So, yeah, the main focus is in Cairo and the prospect of a new ceasefire deal, which would include the release of some Israeli hostages, 33 in the first phase. Israel has revised that number down from an initial demand to have 40 released in the first phase. And it sounds as though the Israelis are willing to compromise further. So Hamas have got that proposal. They are studying it. One official told the AFP news agency last night that they can't see any major problems with it. Let's see where it goes. We've been here many times before, but I have to say there are some optimistic signs that I think we can draw from this. So let's see whether or not it progresses. In Saudi, where you've got the World Economic Forum meeting there, and some very senior foreign ministers, David Cameron's there, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has just arrived. The focus will also be on Gaza, but it will be a few steps on. That's the day after plan, who reconstructs it, how you create a satisfactory political operation to govern Gaza, what the Arab countries can bring to it, but what they would require in return from Israel, that kind of thing. But it's to try and make sure that there is progress going along on twin tracks. So if at what point we do get to a permanent ceasefire and an end to the war, whenever that might happen, the sort of the day after political process is already well underway.
Alistair Bunkle, as always, thanks so much live in Jerusalem for us this morning. Well, lots more to come, of course, domestic and foreign in today's news. Leah's here to break it down for us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to also work with you again.
Oh, well,
Alfred. Enjoying it already. OK, other big stories to bring viewers up to date then. And MPs will debate whether or not to legalise assisted dying today. It comes after more than 200,000 members of the public signed an online petition. But not everyone is happy about it. Daniel Henry reports.
I'll defend his choice in doing it and me helping him right to the end.
Barbara wants to talk about assisted dying.
If you're in the last throes of a terminal illness and you're suffering intolerably and you want it to end, it's an act of enormous cruelty not to let someone end their life.
She helped her husband Adrian to die. 2 years ago, they travelled to Switzerland to end his life.
We were together for 20 years. And during that 20 years, our big passion was endurance car rallying in old cars. And we'd driven all over the world, in over 80 countries. And he wanted me to drive him because he said, you know, it was going to be our last road trip. I helped a dying, suffering man have a decent end, a loving, compassionate, calm, peaceful, controlled, pain-free, quick end, because he couldn't carry on. He did not want to carry on living.
More than 200,000 people have signed a petition forcing a debate in Parliament. But not everyone is convinced.
I'm deeply worried, deeply concerned about the idea of legislating assisted dying, assisted suicide in the UK in the current premise of our healthcare system. We need to be very careful about what we ask for in this country, in this setting. So I asked the government to relook at this. I asked for healthcare to look at this again. And if we want this in this country, we need to go back out to the public to have a proper conversation about what it is that assisted dying is in the UK.
Today's debate will give MPs a chance to share their views. What MPs say and do next is a matter of life and death. Daniel Henry, Sky News.
The government plans to overhaul the disability benefit system. It's believed the personal independent payment could be replaced with one-off grants or even vouchers. One disability charity has described the reforms as a reckless assault on disabled people. Hundreds of Border Force staff at Heathrow Airport start their 4-day strike today. They're protesting changes to working conditions. The Public Commercial Services Union says more than 300 members of staff will stop working in Terminals 2, 3, 4 and 5. The union says around 250 border staff will lose their jobs under new roster plans. The Home Office says it has plans in place to minimise disruption. A lack of access to clinical trials for teenagers and young adults with cancer is setting back treatment and their chances of survival. The Teenage Cancer Trust says there aren't enough trials for 13 to 24-year-olds.
Young people often get some of the rarest and least common forms of cancer, and there are fewer trials available for those. So things like brain cancers and soft tissue sarcomas. And because there are relatively small numbers of young people with cancer, I think it's really important we remember that cancer kills more young people in the UK than any other disease. So making sure that young people have got access to the newest and best treatments.
9 men will go on trial in Stuttgart today, charged in connection with an alleged far-right plot to topple the German government. Charges include high treason, attempted murder, plotting a violent coup and imposing martial law. The hearing in a maximum security courtroom, well, it marks the start of 3 trials for 27 people and one of the largest legal proceedings in German history. We'll have more on that as it develops through the day.
Great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Back to the headlines of the day, and to discuss that is the Labour Deputy National Campaign Coordinator, Ellie Reeves. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
We led off with Mel Stride, the government minister, this morning with that breaking news that Sky News understands Humza Yousaf is considering resigning today. Is Labour ahead of course, potential Scottish parliamentary elections, but certainly ahead of a general election, celebrating the turmoil within the SNP at the moment?
I think there's chaos in the SNP and, you know, people of Scotland are being let down. So I'm not sure there's much to celebrate in relation to that. You've got 1 in 6 Scots on NHS waiting lists, failing public services, a failure to get to grips with the cost of living crisis. And, you know, no one voted for Humza Yousaf. And given all of the chaos, I think there should be an election up in Scotland so that people in Scotland can have their say on what's happening up there. At the moment, they're being failed by an SNP government in Holyrood and a Conservative government in Westminster.
Do you think it's likely that he will resign?
I don't know the answer to that, but certainly the way things have played out in recent days, it looks like he's got a few friends left. So we'll need to see what happens in the coming days.
I was talking with Mel Stride earlier as well about the latest migration numbers and the idea that Ireland, being disappointed that they're seeing a pickup in numbers of asylum seekers reaching their shores, is a sign that in a week in after the bill passing that the Rwanda plan is working. What's your take on that?
I don't think that the Rwanda plan is workable. If you look at the figures for Saturday, 359 people crossed the channel in small boats. Now, that's more than the capacity of the Rwanda scheme. So they weren't deterred by the votes in Parliament last week. We've seen 7,000 people cross the channel just this year. The scheme will only take 1% of asylum seekers if and when the flights take off. You know, even Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister, Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary, have said that, you know, a symbolic flight might take off, but actually it's just a gimmick and it's not going to tackle the issue.
What about the idea that Ireland might want to return asylum seekers to the UK? What would Labour's response be to that?
Well, we don't know what conversations have taken place between the government and the government in Ireland. And what I would say is that given the numbers that are still crossing the channel, it doesn't look like the scheme is acting as a deterrent.
But specifically on the idea of Ireland wanting to return asylum seekers to the UK, would Labour say no to that?
Well, I think that, you know, we don't know what conversations are taking place, but one thing I would say is that returns of asylum seekers have collapsed by 40%. There's no real plan to tackle the small boats. There's no real deterrent.
That's the broad point, and we've heard your very clear answer that the Rwanda plan isn't working and isn't workable. What about specifically the idea that Ireland might want to return asylum seekers to the UK?
Well, you know, we used to have the Dublin Agreement in place, which allowed for returns to EU countries. The government ripped that up and didn't replace it with anything, which is why we've seen a huge reduction in returns, a huge increase in hotel use. So the government have failed to get to grips with these issues. We're spending millions of pounds every day on hotels because the government haven't cleared the backlog and they're not returning people. And they don't seem to have a plan to deal with any of that.
Also wanted to touch on the mental health reforms that Labour have been talking about and offset, I guess, by the announcement today by Mel Stride and the Work and Pension Secretary about trying to reform benefits that are paid to long-term out-of-work sick people, specifically those because of mental health reasons. Do you think it is right to look again at some of those laws and rules, particularly as it relates to mental health, or not?
Well, people that can work should work, but we've seen a huge collapse in support for mental ill health, which is why today Labour have set out a plan to tackle and prevent mental ill health. So under Labour, we would put in place 8,500 new specialist mental health workers. We'd make sure that there is a mental health support worker in every school supporting young people so they don't go into adulthood with mental health problems, as well as setting up mental health community hubs with open access in communities. So focusing on the prevention of mental ill health. So the government have made these statements, but actually they've not got a plan to tackle mental ill health in our communities.
There's a suggestion in the interview I did with Mel Stride that actually a job itself is part of, not solely, but part of the solution to some people's mental health issues. Do you think that's true, that a job is a sort of gives a rewarding sense in that?
Yeah, I think work is really important. It's really important for dignity, for self-respect. But at the moment, the benefit system isn't set up to support people into work. For example, if you are on personal independence payments, you're not encouraged to seek work. And if you do take a job, then you lose your benefits and have to go through reassessment. That's why we have said that we'd reform it so that you can try work without losing your benefits and without having to go through a lengthy and stressful reassessment process. So that would help to get people into work, giving it a go, giving them the confidence to take the plunge. And another aspect of that would be reforming access to work assessments so that people know what aids and support they might get in a job before starting work. Again, encouraging people to take that plunge into work. And, you know, I know that the government have published a green paper. It's a consultation rather than actually any firm proposals to get to grips with this issue, which has happened on their watch.
Local elections on Thursday. What would victory look like in those local elections for Labour? Is it such a poor result for the Conservatives that Rishi Sunak's leadership comes into question? Or, in fact, do you want to face Rishi Sunak in the next general election?
Well, with the local elections, we'll be looking at our progress in areas where we need to win the parliamentary seat in order to form a government. We're not taking any votes for granted in these elections. We're speaking to voters and fighting for every vote. And we'll see what happens on Thursday. But we'll be looking at our vote share and also whether we're making progress in those seats that we need to win at the general election.
Ellie Reeves, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Labour's Deputy National Campaign Coordinator. Lots more, of course, to come here on The Breakfast Show. We'll be talking again about the latest question over Humza Yousaf's future, in particular whether or not he will decide to face the two votes of confidence that he faces. One is tabled by the Conservatives and is indicatory, the other by Labour, and could force elections potentially there. And Gurpreet Narwan joins me back here on set to discuss all of this. And clearly both the Conservatives and Labour are enjoying what's happening within the SNP at the moment.
I think there's no doubt that Labour's probably rubbing its hands with glee a little bit over the fallout of all of this. What you heard from Ellie Reeves there was actually quite similar to what you heard from Mel Stride, a focus on the SNP's record on public services, saying that her party cared about NHS, education, public services, areas where there's a feeling among some that the SNP has failed. And Mel Stride said exactly the same thing, once again trying to create some distance between the SNP's record in Holyrood and what their parties can offer. I think the difference between Ellie Reeves is obviously that she was trying to tarnish the Conservatives, saying that they too present a continuity candidates. That line there where she said that they fail people from Westminster and the SNP are failing people from Holyrood, calling for elections. And I think there's no doubt at the moment that elections in Scotland, the main party that stands to benefit is Labour. So you can see from their perspective why they're eager for voters to go to the polls.
Gurpreet, great stuff. Thanks so much. Gurpreet Narwan there. Now, Thursday's local elections could be the last big test of the government's popularity before the next general election. Rishi Sunak has also got a by-election to worry about, and with good reason, based on the polls. But despite the collapse of Tory support in the rest of the country, it looks like the party's mayors might hang on in certain locations, specifically in Tees Valley. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has this report.
May 2021, a shock by-election win in Hartlepool. Boris Johnson triumphing where his party hadn't in decades.
Are you here in Hartlepool for good, or is this a one-off win?
It's been a long 3 years for the Conservative Party. It was on this exact spot that was the high tide of Boris mania. He'd conquered the Red Wall. But the picture today is very different. Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchen romped to re-election in 2021 with over 70% of the vote.
Thank you very much.
This chippy was a campaign stop in 2021. Diners now have less appetite for the party in power. What's your view of the Conservatives?
Very disappointed. The first time that I'd voted Conservative and I felt they let me down.
With his party and its leader well behind in the polls, the mayor's campaign has one clear message. Ben, Ben, Ben. You have to look very, very closely at his adverts to find the word Conservatives or any other link to Rishi Sunak's party. Local investment is at the heart of the mayor's personal brand. Hartlepool's town shopping centre is promised a major renewal, but locals' patience is wearing thin. Have you seen levelling up since the Tories came in?
Levelling up. Well, that's a joke as well, isn't it? You level up in London, but you don't level up in the northeast of England.
For Labour, victory here would be a big step in rebuilding the Red Wall.
So whilst there's an appearance of big projects going up and a lot of announcements, people on the doorstep are saying to me that they're not actually seeing the difference.
Ben Houchen may buck the trend in this corner of the Red Wall, which would be a ray of light for Rishi Sunak in an otherwise dismal set of results, because it could demonstrate the party losing its grip on parts of the north that lent their vote to Boris Johnson. At the other end of the Red Wall, there's a vacancy in Blackpool. This, a Labour seat for 2 decades, until Boris Johnson came along. But now the scandal-hit Conservative MP has resigned.
Place your bets!
Would you be voting Tory at the next election?
No, definitely not. I'll vote anybody to get the Tories out.
If Boris Johnson was still in, do you think the Tories would have a chance around here?
Yeah.
Probably. Probably, sadly.
With Boris Johnson gone and little levelling up money falling their way, could the absence of larger-than-life figures be a handicap in the 2-horse race for number 10?
Number 2 is your winner!
Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here with me on set. Sam, what's so interesting about that VT is the amount of local politics, but identity politics, individuals, that's clearly playing a role here. Is Rishi Sunak part of that, or is it much more the local candidates?
Well, that's exactly the right question at the heart of that film, Wilf. Look, that really was the story of 2 different races. The Tees Valley race, where against all of the national picture, the candidate for the Tories there, Ben Houchen, is a big, big personality that many locals, including those that say they're lifelong Labour or would never vote Tory, still willing to give Ben Houchen for, because he's done recognisable things. I mean, one of the things he's done is he said he'll look into building a massive tunnel underneath the river, underneath the port, from Hartlepool all the way to Redcut's, 12 miles. It feels very, very Boris Johnson. And I think where there is a kind of personality politics, the Tories look like they might do OK, same as Andy Street in the West Midlands, where he's on a knife edge, he may just cling on as well. Other end of the Red Wall in Blackpool, and the candidates are less well known, so they're relying on the kind of national reputations of the parties. It is a Westminster seat that's up for election after the Tory MP resigned before he could be kicked out potentially by his constituents there. Well, I think Labour and the Tories expect it to turn from blue to red, exactly, I think, because of that point. Where's the personality?
So much to unpack in that and broader local election stories, and Sam's going to stick around because we're going to discuss his podcast, Politics with Jack and Sam. Jack will be joining us too in a little while after a break. But by the way, first of all, let's just show you the full list of candidates for the Tees Valley mayoral election first. They're on your screen now. And here's the full list of candidates for the Blackpool South by-election. And a reminder, of course, local elections taking place on Thursday across the country. Well, we're now going to take a very quick break and we'll be back to talk about politics at Jack and Sam.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory order, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll be talking to Dr. Philippa Kay, a resident GP here on the show. But first, a reminder of the top stories.
Thank you, Wilfred. Sky News understands that Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, is considering resigning. The SNP leader faces 2 votes of no confidence this week. The government will reject any bid from Ireland to return asylum seekers unless France agrees to do the same, with boats crossing the Channel, according to government sources. MPs will debate assisted dying after hundreds of thousands of people signed a petition to demand a change in the law. Campaigners are expected to gather outside Parliament ahead of the debate this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks so much. A big week, of course, for the Prime Minister. A big episode of Politics at Jack and Sam's, as ever. And Sam is here, of course, as he was before the break, and joining us, Jack Blanchard, political correspondent for Politico. Very good morning to you, Jack, and joining us here. So I want to listen to the podcast on the way in. Outstanding, as always. And let's start on the big picture question, Jack, about how much the defection over the weekend undid an otherwise very positive week for the Prime Minister, slightly positive week.
I mean, it's all relative, isn't it? But this is a Prime Minister who just cannot catch a break, right? Whenever things start to go in the right direction for him, and he did a welfare announcement that his Tory MPs quite like. He went abroad last week and made a big defence spending announcement. His Tory MPs loved that. He seems to be getting back on the front foot ahead of these all-important local elections on Thursday. He passed the Rwanda bill after months of wrangling, and then whack, over the weekend, one of his own MPs crosses the floor to Labour, and suddenly the headlines are all negative for Rishi Sunak again. And this has happened to him time and time and time again since he took over in number 10.
Does it undo it, ultimately, or was it still a decent
I wouldn't
week?
go that far. I mean, there is a sense sometimes, what matters most to Rishi Sunak at the moment is his own party's view of him. And a defection, funnily enough, can sometimes bring a party together, because there's nothing that enrages these tribal MPs more than seeing one of their own cross over to the other team. So I don't think it undoes it all, but it's, you know, every day that there's negative headlines about the government is another day closer to the general election when Rishi Sunak can't get back on the front foot.
Particularly that sort of defection. It's one thing kind of going to reform. It's like Manchester United to Manchester City when you get a Tory to Labour switch. It's a very overt switch. Sam, when you were discussing that part on the podcast, what piqued my interest most of all was when you said that Wes Streeting played a big role in attracting Poulter across. And I wondered whether part of his ability to do that, maybe I'm going too far here, was that his take on his department and on the NHS broadly is sort of Tory light in some of the rhetoric that we've heard, or is there too big a leap in that?
I certainly think, how can I put this diplomatically, that the Labour Party is a very, very big tent and it can encompass people like Wes Streeting at one end and maybe Angela Rayner at the other end. At the moment, that looks like an electoral asset, but when you're in government, Keir Starmer's going to have to choose broadly between those kinds of different styles of solutions to problems. I was really fascinated in the last few days listening to Wes Streeting. Take Labour's big policy announcement on Thursday of renationalising the railways. Now, when Lou Haig talks about it, and she's the shadow Transport Secretary, a bit more on the left of the shadow cabinet, she criticised the companies that ran the railways, saying that those dividend payments, the payments to shareholders, were wasteful. And that was one of the reasons she wanted to do it. But when Wes Streeting talked about exactly the same policy, he sounded like he thought that the reason that you should renationalise the railways was a much more almost Tory-sounding reason. He said there wasn't enough competition. Now, those sorts of things can look smart, maybe, in the run-up to a general election, but to have those different impulses round the top table might be more difficult in government.
Really interesting. Jack, we were talking just before the break about local elections and the by-election as well, Blackpool. What are the sort of expectations coming into this? Again, you know, it's all relative, as you said in your first answer. Is it all relative again for the Prime Minister?
To a degree. I mean, expectations for the Tory party at the moment are on the floor. Everyone expects them to get an absolute pasting on Thursday, and let's be clear, they definitely will, right? They've got almost 1,000 councillors up for election, and most people expect them to lose about half of them. That's a terrible performance by any measure. They were expected to lose the Blackpool seat as well, and they're expected to lose most of the mayoral contest as well. So that's not a good set of results. But the expectations are so low that for Rishi Sunak, almost any high-profile win in there will look quite good. So if his mayor in the West Midlands, Andy Street, can hang on to that, if his mayor in the Tees Valley, Ben Houchin, can hang on, suddenly Rishi Sunak has one or two things to point to where he goes, come on, guys, there's signs here where it's not so bad, and maybe the forces within the Tory party who are sort of manoeuvring against him will have to stay quiet.
I mean, on that note, Sam, do you think the plotters will stay quiet?
So they know that if, for instance, Ben Houchin stays Tees Valley mayor for a third term, there just isn't much chance of letters going in, of letters of no confidence from Tory MPs to Graham Brady. There's just not enough of a case. And I think in that scenario, I think that the threat from the plotters is not desperately high, and I think the chat of an earlier election is predicated on there being problems and a vote which Rishi Sunak would survive, but having been wounded might go to the country sooner rather than later. So I think we may have ended up in a situation where, despite doing cephalogically and objectively badly, measured against where Tory MPs' head is, the results are not quite bad enough to mean that they make a move.
And Jack, with that in mind, was the only prior argument for an early election a sort of weak one, one that Rishi Sunak's hand was forced to call, as opposed to what he wants, and thus, as we sit here today, is the chance that the election is anytime soon lower than it has been for quite some time?
Well, there was, in a different lifetime, there was a world where the Tories were on the up right now. The Rwanda bill was through, the economy was getting better, inflation was down, and the Tories were starting to surge in the polls, and then maybe Rishi Sunak would have been delighted to go to the country in the summer. You know, none of that has happened, or at least the poll movement bit, the important bit for the PM, hasn't happened. So, yes, I think really the only reason you would go to the polls early when you're still 20 points behind is because you think things are going to get worse for you, or you think that your party's about to chop you off at the knees. In that case, maybe you do it. If those things aren't happening, then probably you stick with the original plan, which I think has always been the plan, which is an election in November when, hopefully, in the Prime Minister's eyes, the economy's had more chance to turn around, and maybe something else has turned up from as well. Who knows?
Sam, is this debate around the Rwanda plan and what it's doing with Ireland a helpful thing for the Prime Minister at the margin as we approach an election, or not? Does he just need to see the fights take off and the plan actually work?
I mean, here we are in local election week, and he's able to say the plan is working because people are being displaced. Very, very short-term argument, it strikes me, because one of the big claims that Rishi Sunak had been able to make was kind of sorting out relations with Europe, with Ireland. I mean, the Windsor Framework is all about regularising relations around Northern Ireland post-Brexit. And he looks like if he gets into a little sticky row with the Irish over this, there might be a little bit of kind of domestic political upside. But the big picture is, isn't he maybe putting one of his big legacies in danger?
And final question, Jack, in terms of the news of the day. Will Labour in particular be licking their lips at what's going on north of the border with the SNP?
Oh, gosh, yes. I mean, Keir Starmer is the luckiest Labour leader we've had in such a long time. He's watched the Tory party in England completely implode several times now since he became leader in 2020. And now the same thing has happened to his chief opponent in Scotland, the SNP, now for a second time. First, the Nicola Sturgeon premiership collapse. Now Humza Yousaf appears to be collapsing before his eyes. Labour can't believe their luck, and if they win in Scotland in the general election, that makes their path to Downing Street so much easier.
Well, gents, as always, a pleasure to have you both on. I was meant to play a bit of the podcast, but we skipped that because we had you here, and there was such great breaking news. But it was a great episode. I listened to it on the way, and everyone should do so. We'll put up the QR code to scan in order to subscribe to Politics at Jack and Sam's, available wherever you get your podcasts. Lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning. We'll be joined by Dr. Philippa Kay as new polling warns the family GP is a thing of the past. We'll be right back.
I wasn't expecting to be having a course in photography during basic training, but actually it's an incredibly important tool to use on the space station. Some of the particularly amazing outreach that we do, as well as kind of comparing how the Earth looks between one mission to the next, which is obviously really important for how our Earth is changing. But a lot of the important communication we do is done by taking pictures of the Earth. It's a fantastic vantage point from the ISS. So indeed, things like photography training were certainly a big surprise. But it's just been a really broad training in everything from engineering and systems to the practical trainings as well. Of course, we all watch the launches with great excitement. And then there's the mission on board, which is the focus, getting that science done. But landing is a really important part of it. And doing that safely is challenging. And of course, if you end up landing in an area that you weren't anticipating landing in, it could be hours or even days before rescue teams can come to collect you. So the winter survival training was to teach us how to do that if we end up in an environment that is harsh, that is cold.
Rosemary, you beat 22,500 other applicants to become an astronaut and go on this course. What do you think made you stand out?
I feel very, very fortunate to have been selected. And in terms of technical backgrounds, the selection was really to be a scientific background or engineering or medicine or a pilot, for example, were the big ones. But a lot of the selection process really focused on the psychological aspects, which I think is more difficult to evaluate in some senses. And they've really done a fantastic job of that, because as a team now, as a crew this year, we've been bonding really, really well. And it's a real pleasure to work with my teammates. A lot of the emphasis we've had from the experienced astronauts in terms of their advice, which isn't perhaps what you first think about when you start training as an astronaut, is really how patient you have to be. Of course, it's so exciting to be going through the training now, and we're really lucky that we know we'll be going to the International Space Station for 6 months in the next few years. Mm-hmm. But of course, there may well be a few years to wait, and you have to make sure that you keep your skills current, you keep your training until that moment comes when you're assigned a mission. So that's something that I think has been really valuable to hear firsthand from the experienced colleagues.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. We're coming up protecting consumers from hacking. Alice Porter will be joining us to tell us about new rules that the government is bringing in just a moment. But first, new polling commissioned by the Liberal Democrats has led to the government being warned the family GP is a thing of the past, with people reporting to never see the same GP for every appointment. Well, Dr. Philippa Cade, resident GP, joins us now. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. So let's talk about, I mean, in your experience, is that also what's happening in reality? Is the polling matching up with that? Very rarely do people come back and see the same GP in quick succession?
I think people want to see the same GP. I know that as a doctor, I want to see the same patients. It definitely makes my life easier and their lives easier. It's not always easy. So I think that people are asking and we're doing our best, but I would agree that it's not as easy as we would like it to be. And it actually makes a really big difference because the whole point of general practice is what we call continuity of care. I know you, I know your family, I know what your job is, I know what your lifestyle is. And to have to start again each time is very difficult.
I was going to ask like how critical it is, because the other sort of thought that I had is now you can have online appointments, and that can obviously speed things up for certain conditions. I mean, that would suggest that sort of in-person, long-term relationship is, for certain things, less necessary, or are you suggesting otherwise?
So I think that for certain things, yes, we can do them online. But even doing them online or down the telephone is easier when I know you. When I know you and I know certain things about you. Are you somebody that comes the moment that you've got a sore throat, or are you somebody that waits until you've had a symptom for months and months? And that tells us a lot of information. We also know that people who have the same doctor consistently are less likely to die. Now, so this is very important. However, it's not always possible. And that's the bit that I think is difficult. So it's all well and good saying, we would like this, but the Lib Dems have also made a pledge that you should be able to see a GP within a week. Well, so are we saying that GPs can never have a break, that we're always going to be able to see the same GP? And currently the system is that every patient has a named GP who has overall responsibility, but you can see different GPs within that. In order for us to be able to meet this aim, which we would like to do, there needs to be thousands and thousands more of us. And then not only do you need to wait to train them, you still then need to be able to retain those doctors.
It's a big problem. There's no doubt about that. Another big problem that you and your colleagues have been talking about is significant rise in measles.
And this is something that actually, as doctors, we're quite scared of. And I think that as a population, we have forgotten these illnesses because they fell so low. And actually, if you ask your grandparents, they would know to be quite scared of conditions like measles. One person who with measles is estimated to be able to infect 15 more people. Now, measles for some children will give a fever, a rash, sore eyes. It's often called the miserable measles because children are miserable with it. But it leads to risks of deafness, pneumonia, encephalitis, which is a swelling in the brain, and it can be fatal. And we don't have a treatment for it. We only have supportive measures. The MMR vaccine prevents it. If you have 2 doses of the MMR vaccine, 98% of children will be protected. 1 dose is 88%. Now, in order for us to say that we can protect people, we need about 95% of children to be vaccinated. Currently, we're at 85%, and numbers are rising significantly. Over 1,000 cases of measles have been registered this year in comparison to about 300 last year. This is a real problem.
We're 85% getting it. Where was it 5-10 years ago? Is that the main reason?
So the numbers have been going up and down a bit, actually, since the late 1990s, early 2000s, with the issue of Andrew Wakefield and a very flawed and entirely disproven over and over again trial potentially linking the MMR to autism. There is no link between the MMR vaccine and autism. So there are some reasons about that historically, but also things about issues around access. And during COVID, that people weren't going for other kinds of vaccinations and perhaps as often as they should. There's been a real drive, a real catch-up programme. We're sending emails and letters to parents of people of the relevant age. You can have it up until 25. We're putting in pop-up clinics. We are really wanting people to come forward and have the MMR vaccine if they're eligible.
Do you think that COVID did affect people's willingness to have other long since proven vaccinations, which, you know, the data, as you're saying, is very, very strong on.
Yes.
That was a factor?
Yes, absolutely. And there was a lot of misinformation about COVID and COVID vaccinations, and there were a lot of various conspiracy theories, and I sat in lots of studios like this talking about the vaccines, and there was a mistrust between the healthcare profession and people having vaccinations, and we are seeing the impact of that going forward. But also, people were reluctant to leave their houses because that's what we were told, even for medical appointments. So the routine vaccinations, which we were still doing, lots of people were like, oh, that can wait, that can wait.
Mm-hmm.
And then these things sort of get forgotten and by the wayside, and that's what we're saying is, if you're eligible, if your kid missed, that's okay, we can catch you up.
Dr. Philippa Kay, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. We're going to have a quick look at the weather now. Well, warmer weather is on the way this week, but the unsettled and wet theme will persist with heavy rain at times. It will be a chilly start this morning with a touch of frost where skies were clear overnight. Scattered showers will affect the far north of Scotland and western fringes of Britain, with more persistent rain for Ireland and Northern Ireland. That's your weather. Now, the UK has introduced tough new laws to protect consumers from cybercrime, and Alice Porter has joined us, as you can see, and is going to tell us why exactly we're doing this.
Well, unfortunately, cyber attacks are increasingly becoming a problem, understandably, with people having so many smart devices in their homes. So smart devices, any device that can connect to the internet. And extraordinarily, on average, homes now have around 9 smart devices in their homes. So, of course, unfortunately, that increases your chances of being hacked. So that's why these changes are coming in today. And what it means is manufacturers of devices, such as Alexas, smartphones, smart TVs, they now have to implement a minimum standard to improve security. So if I take you through them now, weak default passwords such as admin or 12345 will just be banned. Users will be prompted to change any common passwords. Manufacturers are now legally required to publish their contact details so bugs and issues can be reported, because often people are stuck on hold or they can't even get hold of the number in the first place. So that's meant to address that. And then they've also been told they need to be more transparent about the timings of security updates.
So all of this is great, but I mean, the idea of banning 12345, I don't think any company lets you use that as your password now anyway, don't they? I mean, they always say you have to have a minimum of this type of character, numeric, alpha, etc. So it doesn't sound like it's going to change things that much, even if you're making it the law.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right to say this is something that we do already see in quite a few organisations as well. But I think that this is the first country in the world that's rolled this out. So I think the idea this is now going to be set as a minimum, and the hope is that it brings some confidence to people in terms of the sort of consumers, and perhaps get people thinking about it more. I mean, I was quite surprised to know, so Which did an investigation into looking into this and how often people are hacked, and they're saying that the average home, which is now full of a lot of smart devices, they're saying that the average home could be exposed to up to 12,000 hacks a week. And these are potential hacks that are coming from all over the world. So I think it is becoming an increasing problem. The question is whether this is going to be enough to tackle it. We'll just have to see.
In terms of the problems that we face, again, I'm sure there's other, you mentioned some of the other measures, not just password. What portion do we know of the hacking that happens is from somehow picking up someone's password versus, I would imagine, just simply more advanced hacks that can get round the need for a password and go through some kind of backdoor?
Yeah, I think we're getting a bit of a combination there. I mean, I think the password is certainly something that people themselves can make a difference on, and I think perhaps that's why maybe we're seeing this legislation coming in today, is that is something that the ordinary person can try and be more vigilant on. And I know that's something I think all of us perhaps struggle. It's so easy to use the same password for all your things, and I'm sure I'm not alone in saying I don't think mine are the most imaginative, and you're not meant to write them down. So I think that's something that a lot of consumers sort of struggle with, and therefore to bring this in, that's perhaps an easy step that people could change today. But I think you're right in saying this is unfortunately a really growing problem, and it's becoming more and more sophisticated. I mean, to be having 12,000 hacks a week on the average home, I mean, it really is shocking. So there's still quite a lot to do because they're becoming more and more sophisticated.
As Porter, as always, great stuff. Thanks so much. Well, let's bring in Gareth. who, of course, is anchoring one of the most important television shows of our time, Sky News Today at 10 a.m. today. Gareth, great to have you with us. You updating lots of your passwords?
I've stolen all of your passwords so I can log in and do your programme for you. So.
Yeah, exactly. You log in with the same details. I picture you as being very on top of this. I bet your passwords are full of different unmeaning words, a melee of just letters and symbols that no one's ever going to... I'm not very good at that.
I'm one of those people that does random words, excuse me, all put together. So I kind of have this kind of smorgasbord of delight. That's not one of the passwords. But I kind of, do that. Also, lots of them linked to my old sheep, because I remember the names and numbers of my sheep. Thankfully, they can't speak. So they are key to cybersecurity.
If you're making it sheep and farming related, any regular viewer might have been able to guess that. But anyway, smorgasbord is a good word.
If you can spell it.
If you can spell it, exactly. Anyway, tell us what you've got coming up, and focusing, no doubt, on some potentially unfolding live events north of the border.
It's scrolling across the bottom of all our screens, isn't it? We understand Humza Yousaf, the Scottish SNP leader, planning to resign as early as today. Don't exactly know when, but I'm sure we will bring that to you as soon as we get anything from Edinburgh. It's been a torrid few days for Scottish politics, hasn't it? 10 days ago, the SNP, Humza Yousaf, scrapping those key climate pledges. They were going to scrap and reduce carbon and greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030. Scrapped that. That then put the power sharing agreement with the Greens in jeopardy. So on Thursday, he scrapped that. And now it feels as though the pressure is mounting. 2 votes of confidence, one brought by the Scottish Labour Party, one brought by the Scottish Conservatives. They're going to take place later this week. But it looks as though, Wilf, that Humza Yousaf is going to jump before he is pushed. So we'll bring you all of that. Also, as well, just worth noting, at 10:15 this morning, the Prime Minister speaking to voters in Essex. So we'll bring you some of those comments and, I'm sure, questions as well. People, I'm sure, will be asking when the next election is. We'll bring all of that to you from 10 here on Sky.
We look forward to it immensely, Gareth. No doubt we won't get an answer on when the general election is, because Trevor Phillips tried his best yesterday, didn't get a response, but it was a great interview that Trevor did with the Prime Minister. Well, do stay with us here on Breakfast. We're going to take a very quick break. We'll have all of the day's top stories and much more in just a couple of minutes. Good morning. It is 9 o'clock on today's show. Sky News understands that Scotland's embattled First Minister is considering resigning.
Plus, reports the government will reject any bids by Ireland to return asylum seekers unless France agrees to do the same with boats crossing the Channel.
And Parliament is set to debate laws about assisted dying, which campaigners say are not right and not ethical.
It is Monday, the 29th of April, and here are your headlines. Humza Yousaf's future in the balance. The First Minister could walk today ahead of 2 no-confidence votes this week. The government set to meet Irish ministers as the row over migrants travelling from the UK to Ireland escalates. The minister on this show pointing out it thinks the Rwanda deal is working. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, touches down on his first stop of a Middle Eastern tour to discuss the governance of post-war Gaza. More than 200,000 signatures trigger a Westminster debate today on assisted dying. And tough new laws come into effect aimed at protecting consumers from cybercrimes. Well, a very warm welcome to The Breakfast Show. And Sky News understands that the First Minister of Scotland and SNP leader Humza Yousaf is considering resigning ahead of 2 no-confidence votes that he faces. That's after the collapse of his power-sharing agreement with the Scottish Greens. He needs the support of Alex Salmond's Alba party, which has reportedly distanced itself from a deal. Well, here's how the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, reacted.
I think that's a matter for him, it's a matter for the SNP, but it does seem an extraordinary mess that he's managed to get him and the SNP have got themselves into, that they are now potentially going to be beholden to Alba in the situation that they find themselves. Look, the most important thing for the Scottish people is actually what happens down on the ground with the services that they care about. And if you look at the SNP's record, their obsession with independence, I'm afraid, has led to very poor outcomes when it's come to health, when it's come to education and a number of other areas, despite the fact that because they're part of the UK, the amount of spending per head in Scotland on public services is about 30% higher than it is in England. So overall, very unsatisfactory.
Well, Labour's Deputy National Campaign Coordinator, Ellie Reeves, told the programme the SNP were failing the people of Scotland.
I think there's chaos in the SNP and, you know, people of Scotland are being let down. So I'm not sure there's much to celebrate in relation to that. You've got 1 in 6 Scots on NHS waiting lists, failing public services, a failure to get to grips with the cost of living crisis. And, you know, no one voted for Humza Yousaf.
Our political correspondent Gurpreet Narwan joins me now. Unsurprisingly, Gurpreet, the 2 main Westminster parties are quite happy with what's going on.
Yeah, I think they'll be pretty chuffed with what's happening north of the border today. But both of them using quite similar attack lines, saying that the SNP had failed on the things that matter to voters: public services, health, education. Mel Stride used that attack line, as did Ellie Reeves. But I think from Labour's perspective, and we heard this from Ellie Reeves, you didn't hear it in that grab just there, but she pointed out that the Conservatives are sitting in Westminster, and she also represents, or she presents the Conservatives as continuity candidates as well, saying neither the Conservatives nor nor the SNP can be trusted in Scotland, and calling for an election, because if you look at the polls at the moment, it's really Labour that stands to benefit with elections north of the border.
Let's move on and talk about the latest immigration issue, which a week after the Rwanda bill finally passed is focusing on a little bit of a spat brewing between the UK and Ireland over growing asylum seekers arriving in Ireland. This was Mel Stride addressing that earlier.
The design, as you put it, is to ensure that there is a deterrent effect. Now, we passed the Rwanda bill, and that means that those that are coming here illegally can expect to be removed to Rwanda. And what we're already seeing, and it's a matter of days since that bill has been passed, is the deterrent effect kicking in. So that's why you're seeing people moving from the UK across into the Republic of Ireland. Is that deterrent
effect by design?
Is beginning? Well, no, we certainly didn't sit down and think about where we would expect people to start moving to, but we did, by design, very clearly put something in place that acts as a serious deterrent.
Of course, it's quite hard to judge a policy after just a week since a law passed, but the government is trying to focus us on the first week's numbers. And what do the numbers, if you step back a little bit more, look like?
Well, they're trying to present this as a positive news story, this spat between the UK and Ireland over migrants and whether they should be returned to the UK if they've gone to Ireland. Mel Stride there saying that this is an early sign that the policy is working, because if migrants are leaving the UK because they fear that they're going to be sent to Rwanda, then the policy is clearly acting as a deterrent. But to your question, if we do zoom out from all of this, the context is the number of boat crossings has hit a new record high. Although boat crossings fell last year, they're on the up again. We've had 7,000 migrants cross the Channel in the year so far to April. So if we're saying that the deterrent policy is working, well, when did the deterrent kick in? Because we've known about plans to get the Rwanda policy off the ground for a while now. And that's something that Labour is really pointing out. We heard from Ellie Reeves, who said, looked at the numbers, pointed out the numbers and said, if you're going to say that this is a deterrent policy, it's not working. And also pointing out that it's cost a lot of money to get to this point, and could that money have been used more effectively?
Gurpreet, great stuff as always. Thanks so much, Gurpreet Narwan. Now, at least 13 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes on Rafah overnight, according to local medical officials. It comes as ceasefire talks continue to attempt to continue the end of the war in Gaza take place. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle joins us now from Jerusalem. Alistair, break down what talks are actually going on and the scale of optimism we have ahead of them.
So an Egyptian delegation came to Israel last week, met with the Israelis, apparently a very productive meeting. The Israelis have then given a new proposal, ceasefire and hostage release proposal, to the Egyptians that in turn has been passed to Hamas. And Hamas are now studying it before giving their official response. Having said that, an Hamas official last night apparently told the AFP news agency that they can see no major problems in Israel's new proposal. So that sounds quite optimistic. A Hamas team are flying to Cairo today for further talks. An Israeli team has been invited to Cairo as well to be a part of those talks to try and accelerate the process. The Israelis say that they are willing to compromise further. They already have done, we gather, by demanding 33 hostages are released in the first phase. They were originally demanding that 40 be released. But they are saying to Hamas, this is your last chance. If you don't take this, then the Rafah invasion, the Rafah operation will happen. And they're also saying, we want an answer quickly. We don't want you to string it out in order to delay any operation in Rafah. If we're going to do this, let's move on with it, and let's move on with it quite quickly. So we'll see where it goes. We've been here so many times before. I think we have to always be pretty cautious about thinking that a ceasefire might happen. What I would say, though, is there are certain things that we can pull out of what we're hearing that do seem to be quite optimistic.
Alistair Bunkle, as always, thanks so much. By the way, good timing there. We did see Secretary Blinken, of course, there in Riyadh whilst we were talking. Lord Cameron is there in Riyadh as well at the same gathering. More on that later. But first, time for all the other day's stories, Leah.
Thank you very much. MPs will debate whether or not to legalise assisted dying today. It comes after more than 200,000 members of the public signed an online petition, but not everyone is happy about it.
I'll defend his choice in doing it and me helping him right to the end.
Barbara wants to talk about assisted dying.
If you're in the last throes of a terminal illness and you're suffering intolerably and you want it to end, it's an act of enormous cruelty not to let someone end their life.
She helped her husband Adrian to die. 2 years ago, they travelled to Switzerland to end his life.
We were together for 20 years. And during that 20 years, our big passion was endurance car rallying in old cars. And we'd driven all over the world, in over 80 countries. And he wanted me to drive him because he said, it was going to be our last road trip. I helped a dying, suffering man have a decent end, a loving, compassionate, calm, peaceful, controlled, pain-free, quick end, because he couldn't carry on. He did not want to carry on living.
More than 200,000 people have signed a petition forcing a debate in Parliament. But not everyone is convinced.
I am deeply worried, deeply concerned about the idea of legislating assisted dying, assisted suicide, in the UK in the current premise of our healthcare system, we need to be very careful about what we ask for in this country, in this setting. So I asked the government to relook at this. I asked for healthcare to look at this again. And if we want this in this country, we need to go back out to the public to have a proper conversation about what it is that assisted dying is in the UK.
Today's debate will give MPs a chance to share their views. What MPs say and do next is a matter of life and death. Daniel Henry, Sky News.
Hundreds of Border Force staff at Heathrow Airport are about to start their 4-day strike today. They're protesting against changes to working conditions. The Public and Commercial Services Union says more than 300 members of staff will stop working in Terminals 2, 3, 4 and 5. The union says around 250 border staff will lose their jobs under new rota plans. The Home Office says it has plans to minimise disruption. A lack of access to clinical trials for teenagers and young adults with cancer is setting back treatment and their chances of survival. The Teenage Cancer Trust says there aren't enough trials for 13 to 24-year-olds.
Young people often get some of the rarest and least common forms of cancer, and there are fewer trials available for those. So things like brain cancers and soft tissue sarcomas. And because there are relatively small numbers of young people with cancer, I think it's really important we remember that cancer kills more young people in the UK than any other disease. So making sure that young people have got access to the newest and best treatments.
9 men will go on trial in Stuttgart today, charged in connection with an alleged far-right plot to topple the German government. Charges include high treason, attempted murder, plotting a violent coup and imposing martial law. The hearing in a maximum security courtroom marks the start of 3 trials for 27 people and, of course, one of the largest legal proceedings in German history.
Yeah, thanks so much. Now, Thursday's local elections could be the last big test of the government's popularity before the next general election. Rishi Sunak has also got a by-election to worry about, with good reason, according to the polls. But despite the collapse of Tory support in the rest of the country, it looks like the party's mayor might hang on in Tees Valley. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has this report.
May 2021, a shock by-election win in Hartlepool. Boris Johnson triumphing where his party hadn't in decades.
Are you here in Hartlepool for good, or is this a one-off win?
It's been a long 3 years for the Conservative Party. It was on this exact spot that was the high tide of Boris mania. He'd conquered the Red Wall. But the picture today is very different.
Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchen romped to re-election in 2021 with over 70% of the vote.
Thank you very much.
This chippy was a campaign stop in 2021. Diners now have less appetite for the party in power.
What's your view of the Conservatives?
Very disappointed. The first time that I'd voted Conservative and I felt they let me down.
With his party and its leader well behind in the polls, the mayor's campaign has one clear message. Ben, Ben, Ben. You have to look very, very closely at his adverts to find the word Conservatives or any other link to Rishi Sunak's party. Local investment is at the heart of the mayor's personal brand. Hartlepool's town shopping centre is promised a major renewal, but locals' patience is wearing thin.
Have you seen levelling up since the Tories came in?
Levelling up? Well, that's a joke as well, isn't it? You level up in London, but you don't level up in the northeast of England.
For Labour, victory here would be a big step in rebuilding the Red Wall.
So whilst there's an appearance of big projects going up and a lot of announcements, people on the doorstep are saying to me that they're not actually seeing the difference.
Ben Houchen may buck the trend in this corner of the Red Wall, which would be a ray of light for Rishi Sunak in an otherwise dismal set of results, because it could demonstrate the party losing its grip on parts of the north that lent their vote to Boris Johnson.
At the other end of the Red Wall, there's a vacancy in Blackpool. This, a Labour seat for 2 decades, until Boris Johnson came along. But now the scandal-hit Conservative MP has resigned.
Place your bets!
Would you be voting Tory at the next election?
No, definitely not. I'll vote anybody to get the Tories out.
If Boris Johnson was still in, do you think the Tories would have a chance around here?
Yeah.
Probably. Probably, sadly.
With Boris Johnson gone and little levelling up money falling their way, could the absence of larger-than-life figures be a handicap in the two-horse race for number 10?
Number 2 is your winner.
Sam Coates, Sky News.
Well, you can see a full list of candidates now on screen for the Tees Valley mayoral election. And here is the full list of candidates for the Blackpool South by-election. A reminder, that's part of the full set of voting taking place on Thursday for the local elections. By the way, we'll bring you an extended version of Sam's special report later on the show, about 9:45. Also to come on The Breakfast Show, we will be discussing whether he will walk or not. The Scottish political editor of The Times will join us as we reported earlier in the show that Humza Yousaf is considering stepping down. Also, smart devices required to get smarter, protecting us from cyber criminals. And fatal foods, new research shows many allergic reactions are triggered by mislabeled or unclear food packaging. We'll speak to some experts about that.
The humble pencil, a simple yet revolutionary invention. It's been used to write your favourite songs, stories that changed your life, and for when, well, you've changed your mind. Useful for having fun, for notes, research, to illustrate, and to vote. But on May the 2nd, the story won't end with your cross in the box. For detailed coverage, simply outlined, and a fresh perspective on the local elections. Get the full story first on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory order, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, protecting consumers from hacking. Alice Porter will be here to tell us about new rules being put into place by the British government. But first, more than half of those who suffer from food allergies have had a reaction because of mislabelled food packaging. This, according to new data from the not-for-profit organisation GS1. Well, joining me now, the Chief Medical Officer for GS1 UK, Sarah Atkins, and the founder of the allergy team, Sarah Knight. A very good morning to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
So, Sarah Atkins, I'll come to you first. What this new research, this new data is telling us what exactly?
So it's telling us that unclear packaging is realistically putting an awful lot of consumers at harm. And as a mum and also as a granny of a 2-year-old with allergies, then you'd never dream how hard it was to find a safe snack to actually find when you're out and about. And
just to dive again into that a bit more detail, it's unclear packaging, not incorrect packaging.
So it's
failure to
failure. So the areas around may contain, may be safe, may have been made in. So obviously there's legislation about the absolute allergens, and those are the things that we see in bold. But Sarah and I were looking at some packs just before we came on TV, and the amount of data there, you have to really work hard to wade through it. And if you're busy and you're just trying to get to that correct information, it's hugely confusing. And that's what we found is 70% of people that we surveyed are really scared about what they're buying when they're out and about, as opposed to the certainty of when they've made it at home.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, I mean, of course, it's easy for some people who don't have any allergies to think that this is all, quite a big story for not too much. But when people do have certain allergies, it can be unbelievably scary.
It can be really difficult to navigate, and we've seen so many examples of unclear packaging where the information might be there, but it's across a seam, it's under a sort of fold of a pack. So my son is really allergic to milk and egg, and he was at a birthday party about 1.5 years ago, and the mum had bought a cupcake especially for him without milk and egg, or so she thought. And she was just about to give it to him, and I just turned up at that point and I just did a double check of it. And I realised right tucked under the plastic packaging of the cupcake holder, it said egg. Now, it was only because I've got 11 years' experience of reading this, and I know that my son's life can ultimately depend on this, that I will scour it in that kind of way. But it was so easy to miss, and those mistakes are happening all the time.
And I mean, a lot of these allergies are matters of life and death.
You know, allergic reactions can be life-threatening, and also they can be really unpleasant, and even a near miss or a much lower scale one can still have a devastating impact in confidence, in impact on the child.
And so what's the suggestion to try and kind of solve this issue?
So we really want to make sure that the information's clear. So everybody, we're used to the barcode that we see on the product every day. That tells you it's a specific item. And we're going to merge that with the plethora of information that's available on the internet and make it readable through a QR. So not the sort of menu and marketing QRs that you see every day, but a smart QR that will mean that every product on the planet has its own personalised website where you can get to the information. And more importantly, if somebody's got certificates to say that it's been made in an allergy-free environment, you'll be able to see the certificates, and that gives you that huge additional trust, because food packaging is one of the least trusted sources of information on the planet.
And Sarah, do you think that that can also pair up with the technology that we all have available to us now that can immediately flag to you if you've set it on certain, eggs, for example, that it would kind of alert you straight away? Or in fact, do people have to rely more on their own common sense and not relying too much on the technology?
I think that to make anything clearer is obviously a much better thing for someone with allergies. It still will depend on the manufacturers providing that information in the first place and having clarity on that, and there's still so much work to be done in that field. But if the manufacturers do this, and it's a market worth winning, we're a loyal bunch and it's the most common chronic condition in childhood. So if manufacturers do this and provide this information to have it much clearer so you can just scan it and then see it really clearly, it would be really different for us.
Do the manufacturers, Sarah, kind of want to work with organisations like yours on this, or are they quite sort of elusive? They don't want to embrace the extra cost?
So we're piloting with a group of small brands at this moment in time because they're really close to their supply chain, and we know that it's definitely going to come. And what will happen is not only will it go and work for consumers, it will also go beep at the till in the next 5 years. So we're trying to make it easy for manufacturers to do it. So rather than 2 lots of codes, simplification, the cost of repackaging every time you change something in your supply chain is huge. So we think it's going to be beneficial from a cost perspective, but more importantly, it's going to start to build more trust with consumers because it's fundamentally not there right now.
Well, Sarah and Sarah, thank you both very much. Great to see you both.
Thank you.
So to come here on the Breakfast Show, Sky News understands that Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, is considering resigning as early as today. We'll have more on that after the break. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in just a moment, we'll be speaking to Lorna Slater, the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party. Of course, after we reported earlier in the show that Humza Yousaf is considering standing down, we'll also be speaking to the Scottish political editor of The Times as well. But first, time for the top stories. Leah.
Thank you so much. Sky News understands that Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, is considering resigning. The SNP leader faces 2 votes of no confidence this week. The government will reject any bid from Ireland to return asylum seekers unless France agrees to do the same with boats crossing the Channel, according to government sources. MPs will debate assisted dying after hundreds of thousands of people signed a petition to demand a change in the law. Campaigners are expected to gather outside Parliament ahead of the debate this afternoon. And the UK has introduced tough new laws to protect consumers from cybercrime. Manufacturers of smart devices are now legally required to enforce strong passwords and publish their contact details.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Right, let's return to the top story, the future of Humza Yousaf, the Scottish First Minister. As Leah just said, Sky News understands he's considering resigning as early as today. We can speak now to Lorna Slater, co-leader of the Scottish Green Party. Lorna, thanks so much for joining us. Whether it's of his own decision today or because of a vote of confidence in the days ahead, has Humza Yousaf only got himself to blame if he does lose his job?
Yes, I think so. I think he showed very poor judgment to suddenly collapse a pro-independence majority government when we'd worked together really well for 2.5 years. We'd achieved some great things. We've lifted 90,000 children out of poverty in Scotland, and we had more great things planned ahead. Rent controls, implementing more tenants' rights, work on the climate and on nature emergency. And he just threw that away all of a sudden.
Have you spoken to him in the last couple of days? Why do you think he did throw it away all of a sudden, to use your words?
I think he was under pressure from the sort of conservative and reactionary right wing of his party. The SNP has always been a broad, quite a broad church, but Humza Yousaf had been leading a proudly progressive government, and we were proud to be part of that. And one of the few governments in the world that is not only cooperative, two parties setting aside their differences, working together on things that really mattered to us, tackling child poverty, tackling the climate crisis, and to suddenly throw away a parliamentary majority that was in favor of independence because of pressure from a few, more conservative backbenchers, I think was poor judgment.
I wonder whether you're in a moment where it's a sort of be careful what you wish for type scenario. What is your aim? Would you like to see a new leader of the SNP and then quickly striking a similar deal to the one that you had in place for the last 2.5 years? Or would you, in fact, welcome fresh Scottish parliamentary elections?
I don't think another deal like the Bute House Agreement is on the table. That took months to negotiate and was ratified by votes within both parties. So both party memberships voted on that deal. So reassembling something like that after the trust has been lost between the parties, I think is probably unrealistic. The SNP are still the largest party in Holyrood. They have the right to attempt to form the government. So what I think they will do, and what I hope they will do, is put forward a candidate for First Minister who can command the confidence of the Parliament. And then I assume they will continue to govern as a minority party. And as the Greens have done in past governments of that type, we would choose to work with them on a case-by-case basis, depending on whether we thought their legislation was ambitious enough on the kind of things that are important to us, on climate, on equalities, and so on.
And there's no candidate within the SNP that you'd be willing to strike a coalition deal with?
I need to be clear about that. The cooperation deal was initiated by Nicola Sturgeon when she was the First Minister. She approached us and asked us if we would like to join in a cooperation agreement. So it would be up to the SNP to approach us if they wished to go into such an agreement, and something like that isn't currently on the table.
Do you think that new elections would be something that benefit your party?
That does remain to be seen. We certainly have been polling very well in the last couple of years. People like what they hear. As people become more and more aware of the climate crisis, they are keen to see governments do something about it and keen to see more Greens elected, certainly. So while it could benefit us as a party, I think Scotland would benefit from stable governance. We do have a lot of challenges on the table, and if the SNP are able to put up a candidate that can command a parliamentary majority in terms of supporting their appointment, then it is their right to do so.
You mentioned the aspect that you had, a pro-independence government enjoying a majority based on the coalition. At what point do you pause and assess all of this and say, whoever was right, whoever was wrong, whoever triggered all of this, the people that are benefiting most of all are the non-independent supporting parties?
Well, that is one of the more disappointing things about the events of last Thursday. Not only does it, break apart what had been a very strong pro-independence cooperation agreement, but it also lets down future generations on the climate crisis. There is no way we can do anything other than be very, very ambitious in getting Scotland back on target to meet its ambitious climate targets. And we know we're not on that trajectory. We know the Climate Change Committee has told us that we're not. And without Scottish Greens in the room, how on earth are we going to protect future generations from the climate emergency?
Lorna Slater, thanks so much for joining us, the co-leader of the Scottish Greens. Let's get some reaction now from the Scottish political editor of The Times, Kieran Andrews, who joins us. Kieran, thanks so much for joining us. First, your take on the likelihood that we do see Humza Yousaf decide to stand down rather than face these votes of confidence.
Well, it seems almost certain at the moment that Humza Yousaf has decided to stand down. It's not been confirmed by the Scottish Government, but multiple very well-connected sources are saying that effectively he has decided he doesn't see a way through. He doesn't command the confidence of the party anymore. That is a view shared by not only some of his most senior allies, but also members of the cabinet. So it seems that Humza Yousaf, a little more than a year into the job as First Minister, is going to stand down, and the SNP are going to face what could be another bruising contest to choose a new leader and, of course, probably First Minister.
Of course, as you said, nothing's confirmed yet. That said, if he does stand by, is it obvious who would succeed him within the SNP?
No, it's not obvious at all. And that is something that would need to be thrashed out internally in the SNP. Kate Forbes, who stood against Humza Yousaf last time, would be seen as the bookies' favourite, I suppose, to take over as leader. But that creates a lot of problems because she's not actually all that popular within the group at Holyrood. The other potential candidates are Jenny Gilruth, the Education Secretary, or John Swinney, the former Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon's Deputy First Minister, who a lot of people in the SNP want to step in as either a caretaker or a semi-permanent caretaker, seen as a safe pair of hands, could unite the party and potentially the Parliament, and the SNP hope get them out of a very sticky situation with minimal drama.
I mean, Kieran, I don't know if you're listening to the interview there with Lorna Slater, is even if a new candidate comes in and successfully unites the SNP, it doesn't sound like it'll be very easy to strike another deal that will give the current parliamentary makeup a majority government.
Well, I mean, the SNP are now going to have to govern a minority. That means landing vote-by-vote deals. It's going to be really tricky, and that is the attraction of someone like John Swinney, who they believe, he was integral to the deal between the SNP and the Greens before, and the SNP hope that someone like him can, at the very least, avoid confidence votes, avoid the government collapsing, and then, to be frank, they'll take it from there. At the moment, it's all about getting through this week, next week, maybe the next month, but they're not thinking any further ahead than that at the moment. It's crisis for the SNP, and they're trying very hard to limit the fallout.
Kieran, just finally, I wonder, I mean, clearly she has faced her own issues, whether it's COVID-related or related to her husband since leaving office. But does this make you look back on the timing of Nicola Sturgeon going in any different light, that in a big picture way, not predicting the specifics, that she kind of timed stepping down at the peak of the SNP's powers, or will the SNP be bouncing back fairly quickly?
I think it's fair to say that the polls would suggest that the peak of the SNP's powers had actually passed at the point that Nicola Sturgeon stood down. It was always going to be big shoes to fill. Both Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond were politicians who changed the face of not just Scottish, but UK politics. Whoever took over from Nicola Sturgeon was going to be faced with a really, really tough task, and Humza Yousaf has found that out to his cost.
Kieran Andrews, thanks so much for joining us. Very much appreciated from Dundee. Now, the UK's introduced tough new laws to protect consumers from cybercrime. Alice Porter is here to tell us more about this. Alice, both why we needed them and specifically what's in these rules.
Well, this is all about smart devices, so your devices that connect to the internet, that supposedly make our lives easier, and of course grown in popularity over the last few years. There's smart doorbells, baby monitors, TVs, you name it. But because there's so many of these devices are connected to the internet, it does make people more vulnerable to potentially being hacked, people trying to record, people trying to steal your data. So as of today, that's why this legislation is coming in, which means there has to be a minimum security standard that manufacturers of these smart products have to initiate in order to make sure they're not fined. And so if we go through them, the first is that weak default passwords such as admin or 12345 will be banned. Users will be prompted to change any common passwords. Manufacturers are now legally required to publish their contact details so bugs and issues can be reported. And they've also been told they need to be more transparent about the timing of security updates.
The best thing about that sounds like the publishing of contact details, which would be very helpful if there's then genuinely someone to talk to on the other end. But the rest of it, I mean, not having 12345 as a password, I don't think any company that you try and set a password would let you do that in the first place. Is this more kind of catching up with where we are than the government actually imposing significant new restrictions?
Yeah, I think this is a minimum standard, and there may be calls for this to go further. But interestingly enough, there are some sort of sources I was looking at saying around 80%, 81% of security of data breaches are down to poor password security. And I think perhaps this is something that maybe it's not even just the legislation. This is trying to get consumers to think more about this, not only just on their sort of their Alexa and their individual devices, but as a whole. And I suppose also households have, on average, around 9 smart devices, and it does make them very vulnerable to being hacked. I mean, I wasn't aware, Which have done an investigation into this, and they said that the average household is at risk of 12,000 potential hacks a week because of having so many smart devices. So there's still quite a lot that needs to be done, and it's interesting because this is the first country in the world that's rolled this legislation out. But the question is really whether it goes further enough.
Alice Porter, as always, thanks so much. Now, so to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll be speaking to a former Love Island star using her platform to raise awareness about the dangers of drink spiking. That's next.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before?
Yes.
Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory order, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, as we reported earlier, Thursday's local elections could be the last big test of the government's popularity before the next general election. And Rishi Sunak has got a by-election to worry about as well, with good reason, given the polls. Well, despite the collapse of Tory support in lots of the country, it looks like the party's mayor might hang on in Tees Valley. Here's Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates' extended report.
Can I have a photograph, please?
It was the high watermark of Boris Johnson's political prowess. May 2021, a shock by-election win in Hartlepool. The Prime Minister triumphing where his party hadn't in decades.
That's our mission anyway. Look at this guy.
Changing the face of British politics for a generation.
Are you here in Hartlepool for good, or is this a one-off win?
Or so it seemed.
Look at that,
It's been a long 3 years for the Conservative Party. It was on this exact spot that was the high tide of Boris mania. He conquered the Red Wall. But the picture today is very different, both nationally and here in the northeast.
And that's what we're proving is the case on Teesside.
Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchen has become a poster boy of Tory devolution. A close ally of the ex-PM, he romped to re-election in 2021 with over 70% of the vote. But with Johnson gone, will this old Labour heartland turn red again?
Thank you very much.
This chippy was a campaign stop in 2021.
Lovely to see you in Hartlepool.
Diners now have less appetite for the party in power.
Do you think if Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister right now, the Tories would be in with a better shout round here?
Possibly he was such a character, larger-than-life character. And so people like that. You know, people just like anybody, like a real showman, you know. And so possibly they would do better.
If you were to put Ben Houchen alongside Rishi Sunak, it's clear which one you prefer?
Well, Ben Houchen he looks like he's a leader. I don't think Rishi Sunak probably has proved that to anybody.
What's your view of the Conservatives more generally at the moment?
Very disappointed. The first time that I'd voted Conservative, and I felt they let me down.
Might you vote for Ben Houchen at the mayoral race, though?
I might.
And the reason for that is?
Because he's bringing investment into the area, and this area needs investment. We're so often not thought about. If you live in the south, things are fine. But live in the north and you get forgotten about.
With his party and its leader well behind in the polls, the mayor's campaign has one clear message.
Morning, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone.
Ben. You have to look very, very closely at his adverts to find the word Conservatives or any other link to Rishi Sunak's party. Local investment is at the heart of the mayor's personal brand, but is the money pouring in going to the right places? Hartlepool's town shopping centre is promised a major renewal, but locals' patience is wearing thin.
You've lived here for decades. Have you seen levelling up since the Tories came in?
Levelling up. Well, that's a joke as well, isn't it? You level up in London, but you don't level up in the northeast of England.
Levelling up was a good idea, it just didn't happen?
It hasn't happened. It has not happened.
Ben Houchen's ambitions are so grand, they now span land and sea.
Just like Boris Johnson, Ben Houchen loves talking up massive, wildly ambitious building projects. He's promising to look into tunnelling underneath the River Tees, underneath that port to Redcar, 12 miles away.
For Labour, victory here would be a mighty turnaround and a big step in rebuilding the Red Wall. Their candidate says Ben Houchen's big projects aren't much help for those who live around here.
So whilst there's an appearance of big projects going up and a lot of announcements, people on the doorstep are saying to me that they're not actually seeing the difference.
What odds do you give yourself of winning?
I'm not a betting man. I'm not a betting man.
Goodness me!
Even old friends seem to think he has a mountain to climb.
Is he going to win?
You are going to win, aren't you? Well, I don't know. I mean,
Come on, be positive, Linda.
I want you to win, but you're going out.
Ben Houchen may buck the trend in this corner of the red wall, which would be a ray of light for Rishi Sunak in an otherwise dismal set of results, because it could demonstrate the party losing its grip on parts of the north that lent their vote to Boris Johnson.
From east coast to west, so many seats Labour must win back to regain power. At the other end of the red wall, there's a vacancy in Blackpool. This, a Labour seat for 2 decades, until Boris Johnson came along. But now the scandal-hit Conservative MP has resigned. And Labour are confident they're onto a winner.
Place your bets!
Would you be voting Tory at the next election?
No, definitely not. I'll vote anybody to get the Tories out, anyone. And I've never ever voted Labour. We've always voted different parties, but this time we vote anything to get the Tories out.
If Boris Johnson was still in, do you think the Tories would have a chance around here?
Yeah.
Probably. Probably, sadly.
Do you feel like big personalities have a big impact on the electorate?
100%. People like to be entertained, and I believe that Boris Johnson was the entertainment for the nation.
With Boris Johnson gone and little levelling up money falling their way,
Get set, go!
could the absence of larger-than-life figures be a handicap in the 2-horse race for number 10?
Number 2 is your winner!
Sam Coates, Sky News.
Now just going to show you the full list of candidates for the Tees Valley mayoral election. They're on your screen right now. And here's the full list of candidates for the Blackpool South by-election. A reminder, by the way, that local elections broadly are taking place on Thursday. Now, moving on, having had her drink spiked on holiday last year, former Love Islander Jessie Winter is working with charity Stamp Out Spiking to raise awareness. And I'm delighted to say that she joins us now. A very good morning to you, Jessie. Thanks so much for joining us. So, talk us through it. You had your drink spiked relatively recently.
Yeah, so unfortunately last year while I was on holiday, I had my drink spiked, and I was actually very fortunate. I got safely to hospital. My boyfriend was there to help me, and so were other members of the public. However, the thing that terrified me most is I did share this experience on social media, as it came such a shock to myself. And when I shared it on social media, I discovered that this is actually happening to so many people so often, people of all ages, and they were all in the same boat as myself where they didn't know what to do.
What do you think motivates people that spike drinks?
Honestly, I have no idea, and I think this is a huge mystery. For me, when I got spiked, I almost felt as though I was a part of like a freak accident, or it was somewhat myself to blame in the situation. However, these people were going out motivated to do this, and the reason for their motivation, I honestly don't even want to know. And I was lucky enough that I didn't have to face any of the repercussions of their further actions, but this is a huge issue, and other people are ending up in far worse situations than I did.
I guess I asked the question to get to the next thought, which is how can it be stopped? Is it making the punishment for it much more severe? Is it working with vulnerable people to keep their hands over their drinks? I mean, as measures like that?
Yeah, so how can it be stopped? That is such a great question, because one of the issues at the moment is that it is severely underreported. So in our legal system and within crimes, it's barely even recognised, which is such a shame, because some people, the results of this are extremely awful. And considering God knows what happens to a lot of people after they've been spiked, and not to mention the mental health repercussions, I think in terms of things to help stop this, so obviously what we're doing right now, raising awareness, is a great start. But I do think there needs to be a massive education factor, and perhaps even a deeper dive into nightlife and the way that nightclubs and venues are trained to deal with these situations. Because when you think about it, in a nightclub or a bar, if someone is intoxicated and they're appearing to be sloppy, messy, or drunk, what happens to them? Generally, they actually get kicked out of the venue into the streets on their own. And if they've been spiked by someone who has further intentions with them and they're getting kicked out onto the street, it actually puts them at such a risk of more danger.
Does Stamp Out spiking have any other tips for people if they are going out for a fun weekend or a fun night out to try and make sure they're a bit more vigilant about this sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's such a shame that we have to warn people to be vigilant about this stuff, but that is the reality of it. I would say always going out with a close group of friends and making sure people know that where your whereabouts is. Now, if for some reason you felt as though your drink has been spiked or you're just unsafe in these nightlife environments, reaching out to the bar staff, reaching out to the securities, and making sure you're in contact with people you know the whole night. It's so crucial. But
Jessie Winter.
Sorry.
Go, finish the thought. Finish the thought.
I was going to say, the unfortunate part, though, is if someone has been spiked, they do lose control of these, which is why we really need to put the pressure on the nightlife and bar clubs, venues to educate their staff what to do in these situations. Because if someone has been spiked, they most likely won't be able to get to their phone to contact someone and get home safe.
Well, Jessie, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jessie Winter there, who's an ambassador for Stamp Out Spiking. We've got just enough time for a quick look at the weather before we leave you. And warmer weather is on the way this week, but the unsettled and wet theme will persist with heavy rain at times. It'll be chilly this morning with a touch of frost where skies are clear overnight. Scattered showers will affect the far north of Scotland and western fringes of Britain, with more persistent rain for Ireland and Northern Ireland. Outbreaks of rain, heavy at times, will spread eastwards into much of Scotland, Wales and Western England late today. Well, thanks so much for watching Breakfast. Up next, it's Sky News Today with Gareth Barlow. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here on Sky News.